Welcome to episode 43 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Rachel Pikstein of Pikstein Lab. Rachel is an environmental biologist, ecologist, herpetologist, and reptile educator, amongst various other things. Would you consider yourself a scientist as well?
Yes, I think science I always say is the big broad umbrella, and then from there it's specialties. So I would say I'm a scientist, but the type of scientist would be environmental biologist and ecologist. So I mainly study how humans mostly affect ecosystems, and then ecologist is the functionality of the ecosystem, how living and non-living things interact. And then further from there, I specialize in herpetology, of course, what we're here for, as well as invasive species and sustainable agriculture, and then conservation of native species and habitats. So it's kind of like this lovely umbrella. So, you know, if I go to, it's like being from Michigan, you're like, oh, I'm from Detroit, because nobody knows where your neighborhood is, you know? So I'm like, oh, I'm a scientist.
Yeah.
But if people care to hear, we can break it down to there. So, but in this sector, I always say I'm a herpetologist because that's what I've always wanted to be since I was 4 years old.
Okay. And all right. So today we're going to talk about invasive species, because you've dealt with a lot of invasive species in Florida specifically. So I'm excited to talk about the Burmese pythons. I want to talk about tegus. I want to talk about reticulated pythons, if they're in Florida and established anywhere. I'd love to touch on that. But I have a couple, and we're going to talk about venomous snakes, proper handling, the trend of free handling lately, various things that you're quite skilled at. But I have a couple dumb questions just to get us started. Before we get into all that, what is the difference? Because I see people spell it two ways: anti-venom and anti-venin, right? I see that spelled two ways. And then also, where does it come from? How do they make it? Okay. So can you help me with all that?
Yeah. So the first question, I'll be honest, I'm going to have to look that one up. I have no idea. I think people misspell things a lot online. Like you're talking about like where it's like venon.
And I think it's like N-I-N, venin. I know I've seen that before.
Verse then. I'm just going to...
I don't feel bad now.
Because now I'm also the idiot in this time. Let's see. A fight between two venoms came up.
Yeah. I know I've seen it before.
Okay, here we go. Sorry. Venin is the French word for venom.
Oh my God.
There we go. Google, thank you. venin. And so looking at toxic substance from venomous animals. And so then, of course, the word anti-venin being from that. So I guess if you're getting bit by a French snake, it'll go, you know, I don't make that bad joke. Oui, get your anti-venin.
It's the for the lance.
Your joke was not better. So how it's made is really interesting. They've used horses most historically. I do know some different variations have used sheep. And the idea is the venom actually is directly injected into the animal in controlled doses. And then the animal's body is able to respond and, metabolize that in a unique way. They're actually able to extract blood serum from the animal. And then they do fancy pharmaceutical stuff that I'd have to Google. But the idea is they're able to extract and utilize that. And so because the animal's body is able to kind of counteract and deal with it, we're able to kind of take that and then make something from it that does the same in a human body. So it's I don't know. I always try to compare it a little bit to vaccines. It's kind of like you're taking a weaker broken down, metabolized version, altered version, and you're giving another body the ability to utilize that, like a map to deal with what it's dealing with. So
like after the fact, though,
microbiology and cellular biology is my weak point next to math. So
sure. Well, I mean, I think it surprised me. It surprised me seeing that it was injected into a horse, and I was like, I had no idea about that. Like, I always thought, like, I knew that milking a snake was part of it, right? But then I was like, what do they do from there? And it's kind of kind of interesting.
It is. And I know that they're getting to eventually the point where, hopefully we can use techniques similar to like polymerase chain reaction or PCR, where you're able to take a small, which takes a small section of DNA, chops it up and replicates it to millions and millions and millions of times. And that's, for example, how we are able to, produce human insulin while we used to rely on pig insulin. So there are more modern methods of producing antivenom that honestly I would also have to Google. I know that they're getting away from having to rely fully on animals. A lot of that I believe is now able to be replicated in, I'd have to Google that, but I believe they're able to replicate in a lot of different ways now. It's much more complicated. They were relying solely on horse extractions, 50 years ago.
That's wild. So they just
really
have they have a horse farm out there that they're shooting
And what's
venom
crazy
into.
is I remember seeing a documentary on it. And I want to say it was probably herpetology in undergrad at Michigan State University. Professor Jim Harding, awesome. James Harding, if you guys don't know him, he's a turtle guy. He's like the world expert on the American wood turtle. And I'm pretty sure we did that at that time, but we saw a video and it was something like only 8 to 12 horses were responsible for all the antivenom production at like the height when they were using horses.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So everybody around me could speak much more on this than myself, unfortunately. But what I think is interesting about antivenom is that there's a lot of myths about it. So what I really do know about it is that it is affordable. It can be bought by the average hobbyist. It's not illegal to buy, which is what certain people have been saying on the internet who've been bit and been in trouble and been loud recently, that antivenom's illegal, or you're weak or wimpy, or other explicits if you buy it. And I think it's something that's a standard matter of safety for any venomous keeper, whether you're a zoo, a research institution, or a hobbyist. But this whole myth that it's too expensive or unattainable is not true. I was lucky enough to do my venomous training in South Florida, where I lived for 5 years. And that was the time when, Sean Bush was like the head of Venom ER, and that TV show was on and all that. And, I fangirled on him when I was younger. And now that like I actually get to meet him and know him at symposiums, he's a super cool guy, super awesome. And it's funny because he was so much younger when he did that. And he's like, oh, Venom ER back in those days, but it's just wonderful to meet and talk to people like them and get to, learn venomous from that side. And, we always kept our own antivenom, my friends and hobbyists. And, I think that was just always a standard thing. And people would always be concerned at the cost, or there was just a lot of myths about it. So I think that's the important thing to realize, is that should be a part of your safety kit when you're keeping venomous. And then also what's interesting is the shelf life, which is that it does expire and the efficiency of it does go down, but it is like, don't throw it out kind of situation. Like my own research lab, we have antivenom that's 2, 3, even 5 years old. We have stuff that's updated as well. And the idea is you bring all of it to the hospital and you start with this, the stuff that's old, and then you add the stuff that's new. Cause like, you're not going to waste it. It's expensive. It's good. And
Sure.
It's mostly effective, but you still like, that's kind of like the routine that you would do with it to keep utilizing that. So it's not something that you buy that goes bad every year. So
if you're injecting horses and stuff with the venom, could you potentially just microdose with like rattlesnake venom and build up your own
that's a good question.
tolerance to it?
So the answer is yes and no, because we've seen people do this. And I forget, and I'm sure with another Google, it'll be very easy to find these people's names, but there is a few very famous people who've done this. And there was like one of the most famous venom extractors, and I believe, don't quote me, but I believe he was out of South Africa, was notorious for like purposely letting himself get bit, and had a tolerance and had bit, over 100 times. And, and anyways, but I believe a lot of those people do eventually die from, like, it might be the 150th bite or whatever, but like they eventually do tend to die from that, or they'll build up an allergy. But there's also people who've tried to do that who've died in the first 3 bites or first bite. So I've read a lot of those stories. I would say at least half a dozen. And I'd say all but like one person's dead in those stories. And it's either like the first bite, 3rd bite, 100th bite, and it's, but many people have tried, and only I think 1 or 2 like have successfully built up this tolerance. And they were purposely letting themselves get bit. So I think that it's from the experimental trials, I would say we should probably not move further on it. But it's interesting why horses do have that ability. But like I think body size is always going to play a big role in anything when you have a toxin enter your body. And something that I think is really interesting that I've learned, at least, and being only a year into my PhD at Loma Linda University, I'm lucky and privileged enough to work with Dr. Bill Hayes, my PI, and he's taught me a lot about venom because he's like one of the leading world experts on venom research. Good friends with Sean, of course, and everybody else. And one of the, he's been doing this about 25 plus years. As a venom researcher, and he does behavioral work with rattlesnakes and other animals, birds and invertebrates, scorpions, and venom work with scorpions and rattlesnakes. And then also he does ecology as well. And so with his work, he's been able to do some really interesting things. He was actually the first person to do scientific evidence to demonstrate that baby rattlesnakes are not more dangerous than adults. So you have that myth that baby rattlesnakes are going to give you everything they've got because they can't control their venom, or that they're just more toxic or what have you. So he's done research to show that venom does change throughout an animal's life. So that's part of it. Not necessarily being more toxic, but the venom's different throughout different stages of an animal's life. And then another thing was that, no, they're not unable to control or regulate their venom. In fact, like one venom gland on an adult is usually the size of a baby's head. Like the myth doesn't make sense at all. So they published a variety of papers on that. But he's also done a lot of work on trying to divide into 3 words. Everybody's always arguing about poisonous versus venomous. Well, if you talk to Dr. Hayes, there's also toxins, toxinogens. And so that is the skin contact. So he wants a 3rd word.
Oh, wow.
So ingested poison, venomous injected, and then toxinogen, which would be the skin contact. And, because a lot of people do have venom reactions when venom gets on the skin. And so in our lab, he's big on us having venom on the back of the skin to test for a reaction, the skin test, to see if we have one, if we're more at high risk for a venom allergy when working with the snakes. But also, like, he kind of gave me like an allergy, like verbal questionnaire. He's like, what are your allergies? What are you allergic to? And I'm allergic to penicillin and latex. And then I have seasonal allergies. And so the more allergies you have and the worse they are, like my penicillin allergy is deadly. So like it puts me at a higher risk for venom allergy. And so like he was like, okay, I think I want you to be limited on this and this because of this risk and blah, blah, blah. And, and I didn't have any reaction to the skin test, but you don't know what it's going to happen when it gets in your body. But it's interesting how these, toxins, things that cause reactions to cells and cellular tissue, are going to react differently based on how they are programmed, within their, cellular, their, macromolecule matrix, you could say, because they're proteins. And I think it's interesting how venoms are so targeted to specific systems. Some rupture blood cells, some rupture vessels, some just melt flesh, necrotic wounds like rattlesnake venoms. So it's really interesting to see how that works. So I guess that's where I know a little bit more about the venom side. But when it comes to the anti-venom, I think what's important is to know, that the companies, there's a good amount of companies out there. There's different brands. It can be overwhelming, but I recommend that people find, there's a few Facebook groups and different organizations that are like educational anti-venom resources that I can definitely provide later as well. I'm sure you know a bunch as well. That are
No, I don't. I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Remember, you're talking to an idiot. So
okay, I'm sorry.
It's fine, and you can provide me with links too, and I can put them in the show notes in the description, and we can have all that listed out.
Yeah,
so
I have at least 2 or 3 that are really great organizations on Facebook, and there's some good different groups. But you can also like what's nice is when you go to organizations. I'm actually wearing their thing today. Venom Week from last year is an awesome conference, and they were in Durham last year, and I haven't gotten the date and location yet for this year, but they do you'll have 2 or 3 different anti-venom companies actually there with nice little booklets and brochures and little stickers, and they're there to talk to you. So, I mean, it's not like it's something that is this big mystery. They're at conferences. Oftentimes I've seen them at reptile expos as well, doing education. So
is it expensive?
So that's the thing is that people assume it's not, it's unattainably too expensive. It's not affordable, but it is. Some venoms can be in, the hundreds, and some go up well into the thousands or higher for the anti-venoms, and some go up into tens of thousands. Like you're talking like anti-venom, for Taipan and stuff, they can be very high end. But the costs have greatly come down.
What kind of an idiot would get bitten by a Taipan though? What kind of a dumbass?
Someone who thinks that it's a really good idea to have like risk everything for some internet followers, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, God,
madness.
that guy must be so stupid that, I don't know. I don't know.
Are we allowed to mention people by name? Are we going to be mean? No.
I don't want to. I don't want to.
I think everybody
but
knows. We'll say Google free handling taipan.
Yeah. I don't know if somebody out there is
apartment, 14 animals kept in Tupperware containers.
Yeah, if somebody out there is dumb enough to do that, they know their own name.
If you're a free handler, like it always kind of goes hand in hand. Not pun intended, with just like horrible husbandry and horrible care and like sickly exotics.
Yeah.
Like there's your starter pack for a hospital visit. No, it is really stupid. And Taipan is like the hardest to get anti-venom, the most expensive anti-venom. And honestly, that's why I stood by people like the Kentucky Reptile Zoo who refused to give anti-venom in this person's situation, because they not only were making videos bragging about how they were this expert, nobody knows snakes like me, and if you can't do this, then you're an idiot, you're weak, you're wimpy, you can't be cool like me and hold this animal, and you're stressing out this animal. And they makes videos bragging about that. Then he's harassing people as they go, oh, we're concerned about your safety. And he's F you. And just his posts speak for themselves. And not only that, it came out that he'd been fired from he's a high school teacher, Spanish teacher, had been fired from 2 prior teaching jobs. And one involved sexual violence threats against a minor online.
Wow.
So how he still has a Facebook group with 50,000 plus people. And I just like to tell people you can always report posts for animal abuse, animal neglect, suicidal threat and risk of danger. Like if someone is doing these things and advocating it for others and putting animals in harm, those are legitimate ways to get them taken down. And enough people do, we can stop spreading this. But unfortunately, humans eat fear-based programming like they do sexual programming. We always have. So,
Well, and this individual actually came and put a comment on one of my posts.
Oh, did he? I gotta see that later.
Yeah, I'll send you the screenshots.
Oh, that's good.
And then it's funny. He ended up blocking me because all of my friends started kind of piling up on him. So he.
Oh no, I think he's blocked me and everybody else, and it's just it's funny.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't take much. It's like he'll block anybody so that you can't see his stuff. But I tried to avoid the conflict so that I could keep seeing the group and keep reporting the posts. It's in secret, not saying anything, just report. Which like I'm not like that type of Karen, but that's how you get them to take down that stuff. Like it shouldn't be allowed. And honestly, even these videos that people put up where they're not even doing anything harmful for a snake, but all the comments are just kill it. Thousands of those comments. That to me is you're encouraging animal abuse, because you're like, oh, look at this snake I found, ew, and then you're allowing, like, the comments should be shut off if you care about the animal, and I don't know, I think there's a big advocacy thing, but I often tell people that when you're a responsible keeper, it's rather boring. You're not risking life and death every day. My rattlesnake doesn't really rattle, except when he gets in the bucket, like, once a month for his little change in his cage, and he rattles for like 2 seconds in the little transport scoop. Cobras, most of the cobras I've worked with don't hood. Like, wow, it's fun to work with a cobra that never hoods. Those cobras are just pissy, but in general, a lot of animals, they're not stressed. I think a lot of people have seen king cobras in the zoo. Every time I see them, they're always sleeping. Everybody's like, what is that? It's like, I'm sorry, but it's not Jurassic Park. They're not out to get you. Animals are about energy conservation, and biologists know that. And then when you understand animals' behavior, you learn to speak their language, and then the fear melts away. But that doesn't sell TV. That doesn't sell, clickbait. And, so I think it's tough. It's just like conspiracy theories and why people love them while they don't want to sit down and read a science textbook and about how they're wrong.
Yeah. And I honestly feel bad for the individual that we were talking about. To be born that stupid and that ugly, and to have to go through life like that, where you got dealt a terrible hand in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah, and then you're like, you can't even make it as a Spanish high school teacher, which I was a teacher for years. I know it's hard. I get it. The kids break you down, and I don't know if that's what made him break. Yeah.
They forced him to sexually harass them.
I don't even know. It's like, I think he was just broken, and he was one of those people who was like, Like he didn't understand what teaching really was, because I love teaching. I'm not knocking teaching, but I am knocking the fact that a lot of people get into it not knowing what they're getting into. And he was
Yeah.
probably like, I'll have summers off and I can't do anything else in life. And I think he's like, what? He's definitely in a state with not good schools. I
Yeah.
can't remember where it is. South Carolina, something like that. It does not have a well-known school district, we'll say, for quality. So I think that they just bring anybody
Don't say
in.
South Carolina. South Carolina's okay. We'll say West Virginia. I think
Was it
we'll
West
say
Virginia?
West Virginia.
I
No,
want
I'm
to say it's
kidding.
the Southeast, and it's not the worst schools, but not known for the best. I will say I'm in Arizona, and we're the 4th worst in the country, so no.
Yeah. I
We're
mean,
the worst.
I'm
You
in
might as well be
Florida.
here. Oh,
I'm
yes,
in
and I
Florida.
taught Florida. You're like 14th.
Yeah, I'm in Florida and I was homeschooled.
There you go.
So, yeah.
In the swamp. You're a swamp child.
Yeah. Yep.
But no, I think
so
I just remember looking up his school, and like wherever it was a very small rural.
Yeah.
Definitely an area that unfortunately was not getting high quality teachers, and teaching right now is desperate. So no, you're agreed. I don't know what's going on, but I think when you're a sad, lonely, desolate person living in a cockroach infested,
Yeah.
I love how he said he moved in and they were already there. That I think was his defense. He put the video down. Remember that? That was pretty funny. It's like, well, explain the Tupperware containers. You're keeping venomous snake in Tupperware containers. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the definition of abuse. Or neglect. Neglect is different, but like it's just. Yeah, it's a form of abuse. It's horrible. It's like if you can't afford to keep it, then you should not have it. So I know that his venomous were all taken away and euthanized, and he denied that and said that the cops shot his snakes
Wow.
and like there was bullet holes or like knife marks.
Okay.
I think he said they macheted him or shot him, and there was like knife marks or bullet marks all over the apartment. It's like, you think the police officers first were not doing that. They didn't touch the Tupperware. Animal control came, and they were most likely like gently put in a CO2 chamber or a freezer. There's no way they were like, you're going to go damage public apartments. Like, come
That's
on.
crazy.
No, he's just like making up all this stuff. So like, it just got crazier. It's like an SNL skit. It was just like following this like rolling bunch of lies. But now he has apparently a serval kitten. And I just found out that he had one prior that ran away. So this is now his second serval kitten. So, whatever region he is in apparently has just really great ability to like maintain their exotic pets. Like, I mean, I don't know, like I'm from Michigan, and if you get caught with animal abuse or you got caught with venomous snakes like that and got that bite and all that happened, they would literally make sure you never own anything again. Like you can get banned from even cat and dog ownership. Like they can say like Michael Vick, you are not allowed to own animals again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's honestly what it should be.
It should be. And
Anyway, let's focus on the positive things, like the invasive pythons in Florida. So let's change gears over to that. What are there reticulated pythons in Florida that you know of? Are there retics? I mean, I've heard it go both ways.
So they have removed reticulated pythons from the Everglades, and they've done genetic studies on them. There hasn't been a huge amount, and I would have to actually like pull up the papers to remember, but I want to say definitely less than 50. Probably only something around like 20. I'd have to, again, pull the papers. I haven't looked at them in a bit. But when it comes to them, they did a lot of genetic studies, and they were able actually to show that they are there is actually like some Indian python DNA in the Burmese pythons. And so the Burmese pythons are becoming like a unique strain. And the reticulated pythons, there haven't been that many, but like there's already talk, and I personally have never heard of them hybridizing in captivity, but there's talk of other hybridizations. So if you get only, one reticulated python to potentially breed with a Burm, if they're already a hybridization of Indian and I'm sorry, they did not do DNA on the retics. They did DNA on the Burmese pythons, but they found that they were a like unique hybridization of these Burmese and Indian pythons. They're not a true Burmese pet trade python, is most of this in the Everglades. And so there is this concern that these few retics could come in. But from what I've seen, there's not. It's similar to the Tupinambus tegucin or the black and gold tegu. It is from Colombia. It's from a northern region. It has a very different habitat, diet, and behavior from your Salvatore marinés, Salvatore rufescens, or your black and white tegu and your red and white tegu. And they actually divided the genus in the middle of my study, of 10 years. So they are quite different, both genetically and behaviorally. And so because of that, They found, last I saw, maybe 25, 30 of them in South Florida, and they have no evidence of breeding. They have no evidence of nest building. They've only found adults and subadults, no hatchlings. But USGS Fish and Wildlife, their collaborative in Florida, has put out publications saying like they're established and they're going to be breeding. We're pretty sure they're breeding. Like they're making these declarations, and you open their study and it's got 10 or 20 as their end value. Like that's their population. And they're all, again, the same age, and they might be different sexes. They're both male and female, subadult, adult, but there's more to it. Like it takes a lot to establish a species. It takes a lot for them to grow and do well, but for them to take over and go from a non-native to an established non-native to an invasive species, which means they're growing out of control and putting pressure on an ecosystem. There's no good invasive species. There's a lot of non-natives we're not worried about. Florida has more non-natives than natives, and it has more invasives than natives as well. And invasives are arguably almost rivaling now its non-natives, but there's two huge categories, non-natives and invasives in Florida and everywhere else. But Florida has a huge amount of both, and their native populations are definitely the smallest fraction of what they have left.
Now, are we talking just reptiles, or are we also taking into consideration fish and plants?
Oh, everything. Fish, plants, mammals, birds, fungus.
Yeah, it's out of control.
But the ones we hear the most about are the reptiles. So it's like the Colombian tegu, similar to the retic. There haven't been a lot. There's a lot of, I would say, paranoia, but it's well organized, well thought out paranoia about what could this happen? Could it breed? Because they were also saying that the Colombian tegu would breed with Salvatore marinae and rufescens, and I'll tell you right now, they won't, because people have tried it in captivity. Tegucin has been in the United States going back to the 70s, originally skins, and then in pet trade, and then followed by marinae, came over something like in the late 80s, early 90s, and was mostly pet trade. But they also were a lot of cowboy boots, like 1.5 million cowboy boots in Texas. So Salvatore marinae, the black and white tegu, used to actually be the world's most commercially exploited reptile for a very long time, 30 to 50 years. And most of that was cowboy boots in Texas, tegu leather. And so a lot of these invasives, the invasives come from the pet trade. But there was this issue where people don't realize that they were extremely exploited. And then through, poor regulations on the pet trade, now they're invasive. So they're kind of being killed and removed in every area they exist. And that's what inspired me to go into the study. But I guess my comparison is that, the gold tegu, similar to the retic, they can establish, but they're not really growing and developing and breeding out of control. You put in the black and white tegu, and it is breeding exponentially. So not everything can become an invasive species. And this is what people don't realize. Like you have 3,000 species of cockroach, only about 5 are invasive and live near humans anywhere in the world. So you're talking about 5 out of 3,000. That's kind of a good understanding of like what can and not become invasive. And we look at ourselves, the worst invasive species in the world. We look at things like rats and domestic cats and goats and particular things like types of grasses and algae, that can be really nasty as well. So there's lots of things, but there's not as many mammals, birds, and reptiles and amphibians when you get into the upper vertebrates that are invasive. And then the definition really swings where people now call elk that are spreading into new regions invasive. Well, they used to also be in those regions when you look back to the Ice Age. So it's like, where do you draw the line? And that's where it's becoming a really complicated issue. And so on the left, you have old school invasive species biology, which is barely 50 years old. And it basically says like monitor, move, manage, cold, robot. Do not use empathy, use logic, human. And then you have the far right of the spectrum, which is the new movement called compassionate conservation, which says they're animals. They have a right to exist. They're trying to live. The ecosystem's rebuilding itself in a new structure. Florida's going to be underwater in the next 30 years. So why does it matter? All this is going to be washed away. And so it's like, look at the big perspective, have compassion for the species, the individuals, but they go a little too hard towards PETA for my liking. So I like to be in the middle, which is similar to how I do my politics. Throw me in the middle and I'll argue with both of you. Okay. And try to finding like the unbiased logic, I guess. So always trying to have that, I always say science is more of a way of thinking than it is a subject or a study, so it's about how we look at things. So I would say retics are not a big concern. And the main reason is that they have a different lifestyle and habitat type. They are a very tropical animal and they're very big and they require lots of, big prey. And there just really isn't that in Florida unless they're going to be monopolizing on gators, which we know berms have successfully eaten gators and died eating gators. But berms can monopolize on mammals and birds. A lot of studies have found, last time I checked, that anywhere you found Burmese pythons in Florida, you found a average of a 30 to 40% decline in all birds and mammals in the area. Now, there's a lot of criticism on those studies that they might not have been, it's, how do you call that area? How do you select every animal? How do you understand the assessment? So, and over time too, there's been a lot of challenges because similar studies came out and also said the Burmese pythons would be all the way into Georgia and Kentucky within a few years. And that's because they did climate change modeling. The USGS ROC people, United States Geological Survey, did a snake study with the funding they were given, and they basically used climate change modeling without looking at the species history. So Burmese pythons cannot digest food or mate above Orlando. That's because they actually come out to bask in cold weather and die because they're from Asia. They don't have the sense to hide. Argentine tegus in Argentina actually gets very cold, even freezing. So they go down and brumate and get away from the cold, and so they can survive. So the same reason with the Colombian tegu and the retic, they're too tropical. They don't have the behavior to avoid extreme colds because most of these parts of Asia where they're from, similar to the Colombian tegu in Colombia, and in Central America and northern South America, it's not going to get cold enough. So they don't know how to adapt to get to these cold regions. But what we are seeing is that they, at least, I'm not sure about the retics, but I know the Burmese pythons and the tegus have shown incredible salt tolerance, where they're actually able to swim in the ocean and go island to island and move into the Keys, particularly the Burmese pythons. That's been the big concern in recent years. And so they do well in there. But that's, again, in Asia, as well as in South America, these animals are in areas that touch the ocean, so they are used to that. Tegus have been caught a mile offshore holding their breath for more than 20 minutes, swimming in the ocean. That's been documented in the study I found. Yeah. And then Burmese pythons regularly go in the mangroves and hunt and eat things. So, and these animals are very hard to find. We're talking they're using drones, and professional hunters from South America is the most effective, but they spend most of their money advocating these python hunts that bring in a couple idiots and people for their YouTube videos and all that crap. And they kill a fraction of what the professionals can, but the professionals cost money. And
what are the professionals doing that the python hunters aren't doing? What's the difference there between a professional and a python hunter?
Oh, that's a good question. The people they've brought in really successfully, and I'm talking like 5 people as a one team, are catching as much as like the entire python hunt. That's the difference. So I don't care who caught the most in the python hunt. The whole python hunt can be done by 5 people from Argentina. So what it is they are 4, 5, 10 generation of people who collect bushmeat. And a lot of them, I worked with similar people in Brazil, and they often, not all of them, but a lot of them come from ex-poaching, where basically they've worked as poachers and lived off bushmeat for many generations, and over time it became illegal. And that's what they've been trained for generations to do. They are specialists at catching wild animals. Like they just know how to set traps, and it's generational, sharpening. And so it becomes illegal. But like what I did, at least with, it was called Institute Quinto do Sol. It was in Mato Grosso, Brazil. And it was through the Wildlife Conservation Society, Pantanal, that area, I forget the other region, but Cerrado Pantanal, like region's office for the Wildlife Conservation Society. And so with these guys, they had hired 5 ex-poachers. And it's because they were professionals that they did. So instead of like sending them to jail, punishing their family, like they're just trying to survive. They're not like the big game poachers you see in like these like documentaries Nat Geo does in Africa. Like these are just small people catching animals in their backyard to either eat themselves or sell. And the goal is just survival, and they live off the land. So instead they hire these people and use them in conservation. So we were using them to trap, they were specialists in trapping collared peccaries. Sorry, not collared. That's what we have in Arizona. Sorry. Arizona has collared peccaries, and they're called javelinas, is like the local colloquial. These were white-lipped peccaries, and unlike the ones here that live in small family groups, these live in like hundreds and hundreds. So we were trapping them and putting collars on them, taking blood samples, radio tagging, all that, letting them go. So like they basically are just assisting conservation biologists in the most effective and safe ways to trap animals because they've honed these skills for generations. Now, I'm not saying that all python hunters are bad. I do, follow a couple on Facebook, and there's a couple who do really good work because, hey, they're out there removing invasive species. That's awesome. I don't think everybody should do it. It's dangerous. And I don't think everybody respects the animals enough to. Again, not their fault. The pythons are just trying to survive. But I think a lot of them do it well, and they use like drones. And I actually am friends with one named Rodney Irwin, who's been catching the tegus and has done also work with iguanas and also some Burmese pythons. And again, he uses really specialized and reinforced traps. He has, a background in tech and engineering. He, he custom designs everything himself. And he alone, as one person, catches as much as the entire University of Florida Fish and Wild Division for tegus every year, which is about 400 to 1,000 animals. So one person can catch as much as, it's probably a collective of like 4 to 10 students or something. But the way they set up and check their traps are very different because they have very strict regulations by the state about how often they check them and how they do them versus what Rodney's able to do. And of course, the money and effort that he's able to put in. So I would definitely say it's knowledge, it's experience, it's effort. It's not that people can't do it, but like when someone's really good at doing it, it's pretty obvious that it doesn't take huge groups of people. It takes specialized people who really know what they're doing. But the problem is there's this invasive prediction. When invasive species become known to the public, it's often that is the point of no return where we consider the problem not solvable. So by the time you know about it, there's no solution to it. It's already too far gone, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't still monitor, manage, and remove the animals because we're trying to prevent further damage and preserve biodiversity. When invasive species come in, they cause biodiversity and ecosystem function to crash. And that is why an invasive species is different than a non-native, because arguably non-natives can come in and add to the complicated fabric of an ecosystem. They can enhance it. So we have to ask, what is the impact of the species and what is it doing? I'm a big, if you know me on Facebook, I'm big at knocking the feral cats. Not that I'm a cat hater, not a cat hater, but they kill an average of 2 billion birds and 3 to 5 billion small vertebrates every year in the United States. Australia has done studies of 200 to 300 million average on reptiles, amphibians killed by cats every year. And so like these studies are just horrific. It's like, do you want nothing left but brain parasites spreading feral cats? Or do you want a complex ecosystem that preserves fresh water, fertile soil, and clean air? Right? Like the natural ecosystem is complex, and you can't just go put a wrench in a clock and then it starts grinding gears and breaking and falling apart. And you're like, well, I thought the wrench looked good in there. I don't understand why this happened. And that's what people do. It's a complex system, and we constantly assume that we should go in and say what should be there, what shouldn't be there. So I like to kind of I'll wrap up my invasive species platform of soapbox today by saying that 80% of global invasives are introduced by humans, either on purpose or by accident. So it's our fault, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do something about it to try to save the biodiversity. But I do believe there's a reason we call it the nasty necessity. I knew that going into this research, but I do feel it's something that's like, it's almost like you're like Thanos, It's like Thanos or Death Note in anime. You have to make these horrific choices, but it's for the good of all. And you can euthanize animals in a humane and ethical way. And shelters do it across the country. And it doesn't seem like it's stopping people from going out and buying purebred animals. We all live with our own ethical choices, but I think the ethics is that nothing should suffer. And, people who go on Facebook and laugh at like cat torturing videos and want to compare that to what we do with invasive species management, it's not the same thing. And it's tough for a lot of people who have, I call it big heart, small brain syndrome or excessive empathy to understand those things. But then I tell them that's why you don't do this line of work. I couldn't be a paramedic because it would break my heart and I couldn't do it every day. But instead I was a teacher and an educator and, but I can dissect things that I find dead on the road. Not everybody can do that. It's just about, but sometimes it's a job that needs to be done.
Is it a problem though? See, my problem that I have personally is the way that we go about it, where we demonize the animal instead of the damage that they're causing in the environment.
Correct.
Where it's, the python hunts and then you look at the comments and everybody is just like so they're getting off on the animals being killed sick, rather than saying like this is a really important thing. It's really important that we maintain the habitat and that we try to reverse this as best we can, or at least slow down the progression. So how do we combat that? How do we educate people to not go about it where you're making it this sensational thing, like the python hunts, where they're going out of their way to make it like the goal is to injure, maim, and kill these animals, but they're taking the environmental part of it totally out of the equation.
It is, and it's a tough thing. And for me, it mentally takes me back to something I love, which is a documentary called Racing Extinction. It had Jane Goodall on it, as well as a lot of great people. And it shows a lot of, just different ways that humans are causing us to race towards the next mass extinction. And so what I was able to see in that documentary, I thought that was really interesting, was they kind of focus on a lot of different stories, poaching and microplastics and emissions, and kind of just jump around a lot. But one in particular is really interesting, where the guy who's like the main guy behind the documentary is a CEO who basically gets his millions and then quits to become like, environmental filmmaker to try to save the world, with his money, and, really, passion project. And so one of the things they do is they hear that the manta ray is going up for CITES level protection, and they're trying to do research on the exploitation. It turns out that most manta rays are being slaughtered by this tiny, tiny little island where their migration comes by in the ocean. And these people cannot grow anything on their land. They have no ability to make money. And for generations, they've been killing the manta rays. And the saddest that they basically take a spear, they jump off their boat, they spear them from above, drag their dead body on the beach, chop them up, and all their little parts get sold for things. But they mostly throw away most of it because they're taking the swim bladder. And there's like the medicinal black market type, illegal uses for it. And even though the animal is protected, it wasn't CITES protected, which is the International Protection on Endangered Species. The Endangered Species Act is only the U.S. And so these animals in this culture, they were a form of food. They were a form of income. They rely on the manta ray. And so they obviously have respect for it. But when you're only seeing it with a spear, when you're only seeing it dead on the beach and being chopped up, you lose the respect for it. You lose the understanding of this animal. And so I will also compare it to like my little platform, I love turkeys. I eat turkeys, but I've also raised them and kept them. And they are one of the most amazing birds. Wild birds are amazing. Pet turkeys are amazing. And people, same thing. It's like, no, it's food. It's food. So we can compare the turkey to the whale shark to the Burmese python, and I'll give you what happened to the manta ray. And my thing is that people need to see them and appreciate them alive. So what happened is this organization came in, and they had done this same effort with whale sharks, okay? And so the idea was to convert what we call brutal tourism, so exploitation of a species, this chopping up and selling of manta ray parts, into proper ecotourism. What if we can go in and use our money, these people, what if we can go in and use our money and convert and give you something? Because these people, if you talk, they interview the people, and the people go, our exploitation's increasing. We know the manta ray are decreasing. There's problems in the ocean. We're taking too many. And they say there will not be manta rays for my grandchildren. They already know this. So they're aware of this. And all of a sudden these people come in and go, look, we're going to help you. We're not just going to come in and say, stop doing this. You're bad. Die. Have no ability to have money and feed your families. We're going to come in and go, let's show you a different way. And it's unbelievably beautiful. In the documentary, they show how they blow up. They go out and they film they go out and snorkel, and they film live rays. They go and they film the spearing and the killing. And then they come into the village and they set up this giant blow up TV. And this is a very rural village. Okay. Very rural. They're not wearing, they're wearing very limited clothes. They're walking barefoot. This is a very primitive tribe. And they have this giant blow up screen come up, and it's shaped like a manta ray. And then they play footage of them hunting and killing and the blood and all that. And then they fade out, and then they show manta ray videos, them swimming, them giving birth, and all the beautiful videos of them as an animal. And then they take the people the next day to swim with manta rays. And like, I'm going to tear up. It's so beautiful, because you see these people who for 10, 20, 30 generations have lived off these animals, and they've done it the entire time with zero appreciation. And they thought they appreciated them and they respected the animals, but they didn't. And to see them in a different light. And so now what they're doing is doing safe ecotourism, where they take people on cruise ships and lines, and the people who come through there on, they have a way to do it safely, because ecotourism can also be very dangerous if it's not done right. And they have people swim with manta rays. And in both these examples, the whale shark and the manta ray conversions, we call them conservation conversions, they are equally, if not more, I know both of these in these examples were more financially successful than what they've been doing prior. And wow. It altered the whole ecosystem. So this whole idea that we can live with, it's very Avatar, right? Which Avatar totally stole, from other stories, right? Because this stuff's been around Fern Gully forever. The idea that we can live with nature instead of fighting it. And there's this great thing. So another great example is what people have done with rattlesnake roundups. There used to be, 3 times as many rattlesnake roundups. At least 6 huge ones have been converted. And so you, again, have a rural town, big rattlesnake festival, this big killing festival. Simpsons even did an episode, right?
Yeah.
And this idea that, it reminds me of like St. Patty's Day. They didn't drive snakes out of Ireland. They drove unwanted religion out of Ireland, and snakes were the analogy. Like this whole idea that snakes can be driven out is a very long concept. And so there have been many in fact, if you go to the website, Advocates for Snake Preservation, the ASP, they have on their website a really good link on rattlesnake, roundups and what they've done. And they have a map showing all the active ones and inactive ones on their website, which is great. And so there have been ones converted. And in every one of those examples, they are as, if not more successful than they were prior by being at what we call a no-kill festival. So instead, we celebrate there's live rattlesnakes safely being displayed by people, within our field. And there's, the ability to see safely taxidermied ones up close that were humanely, obtained. And they have, rattlesnake cookies and plushies. And it's a festival that celebrates rattlesnake conservation and understanding. And it's more successful because if people understand the truth of rattlesnake roundups, like what happens in Sweetwater, Texas, that you can also watch on the Advocates for Snake Preservation's website. Great short 5-minute video, make you cry your eyes out. But one of the things they do at that festival is for your children. If you have your children, you can bring them there, and they have the crowning of Miss Snake Queen and all these fun things. Rattlesnakes biting balloons, getting their heads chopped off. That they will drain buckets of blood and put it next to a giant piece of butcher paper, and the children come up and dip their hands in the blood like serial killers and make art and sign their names. That's in the video. So they've sent undercover people because Texas has these crazy laws when it comes to protecting economy, where you can't publicly defame beef in Texas. That's a law. Because it's too tied to their economy. And Sweetwater, their whole economy is tied to this festival. So they have it. You can't legally protest the festival. So you lose one of your basic American rights.
Whoa.
They protect it. Oh yeah. So the only way to get these footage is to go undercover and interview them. That's what this little 5-minute video does. Is basically them going undercover and interviewing people. They say they use it for snake venom. No one uses these people for snake venom. They're using gasoline on the animals. They're starving and torturing them. Snake anti-venom people are not going to use animals coming from this source. These companies are not going to do that. So it's all lies and ridiculousness. But to me, it's again, they're only seeing these animals. Look at it, it's scary. It's biting a balloon. We're chopping its head off. Or it's like a serial killer festival. And it becomes normalized because it's a small town and it's normal. But anyone outside, even people who don't like snakes, are like, you're doing what with the blood? My children's hands? It's amazing what type of isolation it takes to get that. So circling all the way back to your point, I think people need live, in-person education with animals. Have the ability to still have berms in the laws where educators can have them. And I'd love to see that in Florida where they can bring them. And trust me, Fish and Wildlife has live education tegu and berms they do this with. But they really should bring them around and let people see them. Let them, this isn't their fault, just like a cat, right? And that's why people get very upset that we don't manage the cats when we do manage these reptiles, because we all have a passion for them. And it's like, well, how come the cats get a get out of jail free card? Because they're cute when they're doing the most damage. Arguably, they've caused more extinction, domestic cats, than any other domestic invasive.
Yeah, well, that's a very real thing, right? Is that reptiles get demonized 9 times out of 10, and everybody else gets a free pass.
We need more videos and in-person educational events and zoos and just things where people can see these animals. I don't care if it's a lionfish or a Burmese python or whatever, but they can see it just like they see their house cat in person. Because if you look at how many people have house cats versus any of these other things that are invasive, no wonder they love house. I mean, it's the brain parasite. We all know that. They're brain parasites. Their cats are brainwashing them. The more cats they have, the worse it is. But when it comes to everything else, they're just not interacting with them. They might see them at a zoo once. Maybe they see, but what are most of they seeing? YouTube videos, movies, TV, everything that's showing the biting, striking, hooding, hissing, rattling snake that's angry and stressed out. And one of the things I loved in that video, again, from ASP, when they're showing the pit with all the hundreds of rattlesnakes at Sweetwater, and they say that the sounds of rattles are not the sounds of an animal is ready to attack, but it's the scream of 1,000 suffering animals. If you start thinking of a rattle as a scream of terror and fear, instead of this, I'm about to get you, about to pounce like a cat, it changes the perspective. So I think people need to see these animals alive. They need to see them preferably in person. They need to safely touch them, even if it's a rattlesnake in a tube and they're touching the tail safely. Let them actually have this up close interaction and experience, because that moment can change their entire life. And that's one of the one things I love most about being an educator, is being that first time. And I post a lot of these videos, the first time someone touches a snake or a kid touches a snake or holds a tarantula. I have invertebrates, and they're all named after their education invertebrates, like my rattlesnake, and they're all named after baked goods. So we have cinnamon roll, the hairy scorpion, and cupcake, the tarantula, and all these silly names, because that's what it takes. When I come out and they go, oh, that's gross. I go, you're going to offend Cupcake's feelings. And you got to just play to the audience and even the adults. And then people laugh and they go, okay, it's kind of cute. Would you like to hold it? No? How about you just look at it closer? Grab that magnifying glass. I'll hold it. Look, here, touch the butt, just the butt. And you just do cute things and you can get people to do that. But for example, cinnamon roll was at, I'm the one of the science directors with my good friend Caitlin Rose Garcia for the Phoenix Fan Fusion, our Comic-Con, and we're lucky enough to be able to run a really big space with hands-on learning. And we had cinnamon roll and some invertebrates there this year. And although we don't let people touch the venomous stuff, we hold it ourselves for the venomous invertebrates, which are very different to free handle versus venomous snakes. When we had cinnamon roll up and we were talking, we had a girl come up to our booth who was absolutely terrified, had never been in a room with a scorpion, and by the end of the day, she was baby talking to it. I got a Facebook Messenger the next day, and she just ranted for a whole page, just, oh my gosh, cinnamon roll has changed my life. I had nightmares my entire life about scorpions. They were this big monster, but she's so cute. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe how calm she was. And this scorpion's literally so chill. You put your hand in and it runs on your hand, and it likes to be in your hand. I call it the human hot tub. And it will just sit there, and you can move her tail around and pick up her claw and shake her hand. A lot of hairy scorpions on the West Coast are like that. They're just big, big chunky scorpions, and they're no worse than maybe a bee sting.
Yeah.
Unless you have an allergy, so be careful. But I know I don't, at least with these guys, because I was the kind of teenager who purposely stung myself with scorpions, but we don't need to go back to that one.
Oh, geez Louise.
You gotta have some fun when you're a kid. Not venomous snakes, but your emperor scorpion, you're like, But with that, I just was really impressed that someone, you can take away someone's lifelong nightmares with she wasn't there more than 5 to 7 minutes at that table, and came up terrified, surprised, and then was drawn in by baby talk and cuteness. And this year we're talking about putting little hats on their head with a little like sticky tack, not sticky tack. It's like sticky stuff. You can just put it on their head with a pair of tweezers. So that's this year we're going to try to do that on a couple of the scorpions who just sit there.
That poor scorpion.
But that's the idea. Yeah, exactly. Some of them are relaxed. I don't bother the snakes that level. I do little string hats that go on my rat snakes, little Santa hats and stuff. But with their approval, of course. Not everybody knows that.
So is there a way that we could keep, because I'm in Florida, all these animals, it seems like way after the fact, once they're already invasive, once they're already out in the environment, making these detrimental impacts, that's when everybody says, all right, you can't have these anymore. Mm-hmm. Your dad walks in the room and says, you guys lost it. You guys abused it. Now you can't have it anymore. You can't have these animals. Is there a way that in your mind that keepers in Florida and all across the country, right? Because it seems like any laws that go into effect in Florida end up spreading, and migrating north and out west and everything. Is there a way that we could keep retics and berms and everything safely? And I mean, to me, it's I'd rather have it regulated where I could actually have them and educate people on them, right? Instead of it just being, no, you can't have any of these ever, and because they're out there in the wild now, the damage is already done. We're never going to get rid of the Burmese pythons. We're only going to manage them. So, do we, could we microchip them? Could we have, a database, where if the animal has an identifying number on the microchip and they need to be accounted for annually or something like that? I'd love to have that. Rather than, no, you can never have them unless you move.
And it's unfortunate. They've done both. So I know that in every ban they've done, just to prevent the outcry, they will allow anyone who already owns one to allow and this has been with any ban that Florida's done, honestly, at least I know with Florida, is that, and I've seen this also happen with the Tegus in Georgia and the Carolinas and stuff. And that is that they are able to say, okay, if you already have one, you have this many days, and usually it's 90 days or six, whatever. Yeah, something like that. It's like 90 days or 6 months to get in, and you have to register them, microchip them, blah, 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 blah. So they did that in every situation, but it was always tied with you already had to have it, and nobody else can have it again. And then they shut down all ability to breed or keep large levels. And to me, it's frustrating because there's like almost really no regulations in the past before any of this happened on breeders. Like if you were keeping like, and they blame the individual pet owners. Sorry, my allergies are kicking in, but my desert allergies. But like, they blame the pet owners always in the media. And I'm sorry, individual pet releases do not account for these massive invasive populations. It's these importers and breeders who are just not doing a good job keeping their stuff on lock. And I don't know if you wanted to go into recent habits in Florida, but Crutchfield's farm is currently moving and being relocated. Ty Park has been involved in taking some of his animals and stuff. And although that's lovely to see, if anyone's ever been to his house, there's invasive species all over that area. And it's funny, the first time I ever went to his house, he was like, oh yeah, like they've all been here. It's like, you're the only one in the area that's a reptile source. Like this is Homestead, Florida. It's warehouses. It's families like my buddy Rodney who lives there, who's also friends with Crutchfield. And that's actually how I met him. He's like, come meet my boy, Tommy. He's like, I'm going to introduce you to Tommy. And because he has this amazing Southern accent. And Rodney's a great guy. And then I was just at Tom Crutchfield's house, and there was a cobra being free-handled and whipped out in front of me in the first hour with no warning. And it was not a great experience.
Oh, God.
I wouldn't say any form of abuse. I would say very bad safety, some animal neglect, poor whatever. But there's like just at least 5 species of lizard that are seen nowhere else until you get to his house, running everywhere. So like, he's a great example of someone who's not going to be concerned about invasive species. He's not going to have high ethics, high safety. He's not the worst. And he used to be horrible. He has a long criminal history, which I've posted and shared and is very easy to Google. As many people like Strictly Reptile, who's behind the Lizard King book. Crutchfield was also in that. Exotic Jungles had problems. And of course, my longtime nemesis, Underground Reptiles of Florida. Ryan Gitman. We've had a long history of arguments, but they all have prison records and I don't. So you know what? No criminal history and no venomous bites. Look at the correlation. Isn't that amazing? So to me, it's tough because yes, these people in the industry have changed. Yes, they're under higher scrutiny, but they've also been given back import-export license when they've been convicted of smuggling endangered species. So why, I ask, would someone in the Florida government give back an import-export license to someone who has any history of smuggling endangered species? Like, why is that not, it's like a pedophile, one time and out. Like, you don't get a second chance. And even, obviously with pedophiles in this country, we do give them second, third, and fourth chances. So it's, I think, very frustrating that there is this, I think it really starts, like you said, with a disrespect for reptiles. They are not only disrespected in the media, society, government decisions, policies, and laws, and by the public, they are disrespected in scientific literature. Of course, they are extremely minimalized. Snakes have extremely minimal research compared to things like frogs. Right? Mm-hmm. Birds compared to something like tortoises, and even tortoises and turtles compared to things like snakes and lizards. There's extreme bias. And so this is really harming a lot of different things because there's this misunderstanding throughout all. So, and trust me, if you go talk to people like plant biologists or bird biologists, I'm going to pick on them because I think they're some of the most anti-snake in my experience, although my mentor, Bill Hayes, is going to go, hey, because him, like everybody he knows is half bird, half herp. It's hard to choose. They're like 50-50. But there's a lot of people I've worked with who only study birds and only study plants, and they're like, ew, snakes. And I'm like, I just go, how can you be a biologist and not respect all life? Because if you study ecology and biology, even parasites are essential to the genetics of an ecosystem's evolution. Like, you think, how can a parasite be beneficial? They spread DNA and help the complexity of the ecosystem stay complex. It's incredible, you know? So do interactions between fungus and plants and plant roots, you know? Something to Google later to really blow your mind. It makes everybody feel stupid. So you're going to feel, you know, you're going to feel really stupid. No, I'm just kidding.
More than usual.
It's called horizontal gene transfer, HGT. And it was mad science, like black holes and time travel back when Stephen Hawking was around, right? But we all know those are real now too. It's amazing. So you take the tree of life that does this, and then you take crayons and go, down the whole thing like this. So what it is up to 50% of animal DNA and up to 80% of plant DNA comes from bacteria. and other microorganisms that live in our gut or in plant roots. They're just swapping DNA with our cells, and that has construed all of our evolutionary trees. And this is still
Jeez.
so new that I didn't learn it to my master's in 2016. No, sorry, I learned it end of bachelor's 2008, and it was still like controversial. I learned about it my master's in 2016 when I graduated. 2015, 2016, I actually studied it in a class. And then, like, when I was first interviewing for my PhD, the first round, somewhere around that time, 2018, I actually interviewed with a scientist who did it for the first time. And they said it was only 10 years. At 2016, it was barely 10 years out of hearsay, is what he said. That he was a mad scientist who had to study in quiet early in his career, like Hawking. But this is now absolutely true. So yeah, so it's like people go, again, why does this belong? This doesn't belong. That's a pest. This is a problem. And really, unless you understand the fabric of everything, you can't declare any part as not essential. But like I said, when an invasive species go in, it causes it to collapse, similar to removing a keystone, like a beaver or a sea otter, a lot of different examples of
Alligators.
Yeah, oh, great. American alligator, yes. You take them out, the whole thing collapses, which is why, of course, great example, restoring American alligators, bald eagles, osprey, all that was so essential was because they were keystone species in a lot of ways. Arguably not bald eagles, it's an American thing, but ospreys, pelicans, peregrine falcons, American alligators, a lot of those were affected by atrazine and DDT over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, I had Nick Mutton on the podcast, and he blew my mind. He told me that that viruses make up, like, I can't remember if it was 6 or 8% of human DNA.
Wow,
which
that's
is
really high.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The amount of so you have like this virus DNA that's part of you. Mm-hmm. It's bananas.
And it's because it goes in, hijacks your cells, and is able to basically, swaps DNA, and it messes with our DNA. Viruses alter your DNA in a lot of ways similar to sun exposure. And so it's really, people don't realize that. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And the things people are so worried about, like the average person will still drink from a hose or let their kid play in a mud puddle in the street. And as an environmental biologist, like those are really dangerous things that expose you to like the heavy metals and pesticides and oils and contaminants. And then people go, but I jumped in puddles and drank out of a hose as a kid. And I'm like, yeah, but we know more now. Like, come on.
Yeah.
It's like,
I know that's my kids. I mean, being in Florida, my kids are always trying to play in drainage ditches and things like that. They want to pull the tadpoles out and all these things. And it's like, I have friends and family that are like, what are you afraid of? Why do you yell at them and tell them not to touch that and go wash their hands? And I'm like, it's not the germs. It's the pesticides and the herbicides, because the herbicides, they go to all the drainage canals in Florida, and they just dump gallons of this stuff and spray it on all the vegetation. Also have
fertilizer runoff. And I'm sure you've seen this. The fertilizer runoff causes the algal blooms, which causes the eutrophication, and it can be a toxic algal bloom, like the red tide is from the cow farms and the corn farms and the excessive use of feces, causing huge nitrogen dumps, which causes huge blooms. But the media is always like, natural red tide. Well, okay, the dinoflagellate, which is an algae, is natural. It took rise to the point that it kills billions of pounds of sea life, including manatees and dolphins, in the thousands. That is not natural. And the same thing in Florida, your drainage pond can get something called toxic algae. And that's when you hear about a dog like swimming in a pond or drinking from water and dropping dead and seizuring within hours. That happens in Florida all the time, but it's almost always from agricultural runoffs. You're right. It's pesticides and all the pesticide family, herbicide, fungicide, and insecticide, rodenticide, all that crap. Pesticides are umbrella. So that stuff, the heavy metals, the oils, a lot of oils and gases are carcinogenic, cancer causing. But then you also get fertilizer causes the blooms, and it's toxic algae. Yeah. And so it's similar to like Stachybotrys, black mold. It's like when they get too much, they produce it as like a defense mechanism. These algae or these fungus will do that. You'll seizure and die very quickly with exposure. Even breathing the red tide, if you're at the ocean when it happens, it's supposed to contaminate something like a quarter mile from the beach. And they
it's ridiculous.
Area. Yeah. So it's like, so it's amazing. People think that, but these things were safe back in the 40s when some of these people were alive still, the 40s and 50s, right? Like when they were kids. And when these people who are alive were still kids, back then, because they weren't using these things, they
Yeah.
don't understand what this, 50s through 70s did with all of this chemical and plastic revolution. And then it just became a part of our world. Like they've done studies, like, for example, like they've done studies on like women who clean their kitchen with bleach versus plant-based cleaners versus wiping with water and the frequency they do it. And they compare that to the health of the children under 5 who live in their house. This is one study I saw that looked at their gut bacteria. So looking at the relationship of like how much you're cleaning to like how it affects the gut biome of the children. And the best thing was to minimally clean with plant-based cleaners, only use bleach with things like chicken and, dog poop, feces, whatever. Even then I use Nature's Miracle, which is an enzymatic cleaner. It actually like uses enzymes to cut up. And so like your animal's not going to re-pee because it actually breaks it down on a molecular level. So I'm big on Nature's Miracle for your pets and animal stains. And then I use chlorhexidine, which is veterinary based, antimicrobial, antifungal for my reptiles. And then kitchen, I use bleach as needed, plant-based cleaner. But like I've read a lot of those studies, and it's the idea that people just like think that clean is best. And I know we just went through a pandemic with obsessive hand sanitizer. And 10 years before that, I had been educating for people not to use excessive hand sanitizer and not to use antimicrobial soap. And then the pandemic just made everybody have to do that. And now people are having trouble coming back from that. And antibacterial soap, any type of foaming soap that has alcohol in it, is really harmful to wetlands and turtles. And you don't need that. It over dries your skin, and it actually kills too many. You don't want that 99.99% killed because you're actually creating super germs. So like, obviously, if we're in a pandemic, a time where we need to really attack with super weapons, but on a regular basis, we do not want to be using these extreme products because we're actually creating more of an issue. And it's the same thing we're creating like super pests with overusing pesticide and chemicals. So it's just like, we call it the chemical addiction loop. And it's kind of, our country's really hooked on it. And when you compare our practices to areas like the European Union, and UK and how they manage their policies, they are terrified of what we're doing, which is a lot of reckless abandonment. And it's unfortunate because we get in this mindset that this stuff is safer when it's actually not. It's frustrating. I work with a pest company, same thing. He's like, they want to come and spray poison for 3 months when I could tell them to throw out this bag of dog biscuits that the beetles were coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all a money grab. It's all a cash grab, and it's a nightmare. You had mentioned before that certain invasives actually enrich an environment, or should I say introduce species, non-natives.
I would say introduce. Yeah. So when we use the term invasive, like you have to have caused environmental, economic, and usually it's all these categories at once. You've caused some damage that is a big problem. And, like, for example, like the iguanas are damaging the levees and the telephone poles in Florida and even collapsing bridges. So there's different ways that they can affect things. They're not necessarily out competing wildlife because they're herbivores and they aren't really causing a strain as much on particularly animal systems, but they're causing strain on human systems. But while you have like the Cuban nightingale, which just eats everything and competes with everything and is really a competitor of biodiversity. So you can say there's like a dozen categories, and like they're not all going to check them all off. Sure. But when it comes to sorry, I lost my train of thought in that one. Can we go back for a second?
Yeah. So, can what I wanted to ask for, or ask for an example of, are there any introduced species?
Oh, thank you. Sorry,
in Florida that are beneficial? Yes. I would love an example of that.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I was looping there. Okay, so
that's all right.
So to answer your question, invasive species are never going to be positive. There is a strain put on the ecosystem, and some can be like the Cuban nightingale, where they eat biodiversity and out pressure them and just push them out, or it can be like iguanas, where they damage bridges, telephone poles, levees, and they cause structural damage. So they have to cause something environmental, economic. Usually it's always some combination of multiple categories. And so we really don't consider invasives good, even though they could arguably, and they probably are, adding some structure to an ecosystem or filling a niche. But the problem is that, like, that label I like to look at as like, once they're invasive, they're just more negative than good, and the best thing is to remove them. Like, that really should be what the label is for. However, there are plenty of non-natives that do add to the fabric. So Florida, not many people know that there are varieties of tarantula that are not native in a lot of the orange groves. There are at least 2 species, panther and veiled chameleons, are in orange groves and avocado groves. And this is between like Davie down through Homestead. And now these are kind of places where if you know who owns the orange grove or avocado grove, you have access. Otherwise, it's private land. You can't have access to it. So I'm not recommending herpers just go to find this stuff. But if you know people who know where these are, there's also, I'm not saying they're positive, but there is a group of macaque monkeys living by the Fort Lauderdale airport. That is real, and you can definitely go see those.
Wow.
So there are a lot, and again, they're not causing any measurable damage. So we can say that they are adding to a network because, like, for example, monkeys can be seed dispersers. Many, insect populations can be managed by Cuban nitinols and things like that, if they're able to balance it. But again, that's an invasive species. So it's if they're able to balance other populations, keep them in check, like insects, if they're able to, spread seeds, help pollinate, things like that. There's a lot of ways that they can add to an ecosystem, but things like wild pigs, similar to iguanas, are really going to change the habitat in negative ways, and alter it and causing there to be less room for less room for natives because the invasives are kind of taking those niches. So think of like the opposite of a beaver. A beaver does so many actions in the way that it digs out a wetland and chops wood and separates water flow and stuff. I mean, they arguably can, quadruple, if not more, the depth of a lake and pond. They do incredible things. People don't realize how much they alter wetlands, but a beaver adds niches for other life. And non-natives and invasives often take that away. But if they're not doing a measurable negative, then arguably they can be adding to the network. So the best example I'm going to give is the Mediterranean gecko. I have seen at least 3 lectures on this at different conferences, and the very proud, usually a student, gets up and goes, I'm studying the Mediterranean gecko. They are invasive. They are invasive. They are invasive. And here's all this research, all this research, all this research. And the thing ends, and I raise my hand and I go, what damage are they causing? Oh, well, we hypothesize they will spread disease. That's not causing damage. It's not an invasive species. And that's me in the back. I'm not trying to be difficult, but the point is, you cannot call it invasive. I think they're amazing here in Arizona. I have them in my yard. I also have wall lizards. There is no nocturnal predator of insects at my house. And the Mediterranean geckos are filling a niche that is open. They've never documented them spreading disease. They've never documented any harm in all these states they've studied them in. And in my backyard, I've seen when I moved in and started putting down palm fronds and creating more habitat 5 years ago I'm trying to make my backyard eventually a wildlife certified habitat. Very excited to get Gamble's quail to breed in my yard for the first time this year after 4 years. Sorry, five years. It was successful this year. So 4 years of effort. In order to increase that, but when I did increase the habitat, I noticed my geckos, and I did document this like a nerd, my geckos only increased about 10 to 15%. My wall lizards increased 4-fold. And they're both staying at that level now, very happy, very abundant, and they live in different parts. Like the geckos live by, of course, the lights because they're nocturnal, and they're both arboreal, but they're nocturnal and diurnal. So the geckos like to be on these front and back of my house on this side, and they're always out by the lights. And I see babies every year. They're breeding. They're doing great. I always know if I take a hose and like wash under there, like 3 of them will fall out, and that was one of my indicators, was like how many were under each ledge. Just do a little thing. Go, okay, count. Okay, run back, little guys. And they're always like, why? Like all half awake. And then the wall lizards are nice because they, my wall is basically a brick wall around here in my backyard, and it's got these like a cover down it, and they all live under a cover. So I have a dominant male under each one. So there's like about 20 all the way down the fence, and there was only 3 originally. And so they have territories, they have females, you can count them. And so I've actually just counted and documented my lizards for 5 years. My goal was to increase them, but I was interested in how they would do that. And arguably, if the Mediterranean gecko was an invasive species, it would take over and push that out. Now, not every situation is an apples to apples comparison, but from what I've read, researched, and seen with Mediterranean gecko, I would say they're a great example, because until you can document harm, they are adding to the ecosystem because they are removing insects. They are filling a niche. There's nothing arguably they're competing with. They're not altering. They're just living there. They're living and they're eating and they're breeding and they're pooping, and they poop in my plants. They fertilize my plants and they eat the insects. And I have not been able to establish anything negative. Now, I think they could spread disease. Could that be possible? But hypothesized future predictions should not be a reason to throw the label invasive. And think about this. We spend billions, and I'd have to pull up the statistic, but I want to say last I checked was 5 to 7 years ago, and it's something like $3 to $5 billion in the US every year on invasive species management and removal.
Wow.
And if you look up how many successful complete eradications have ever occurred, it's less than about 20. When I did research on that very topic at the end of my master's in 2016, it was less than a dozen. And I took 4 that I studied and like looked at, like 4 complete successful eradications and how they were done. And the black rat island in California is an example, Galapagos and the goats, killer algae in California. But there's been very few instances. Most of it is reduction and management to prevent them from growing again. So arguably, if they are not, we're spending enough money managing ones we can barely control. Why are we so worried about ones that are hypothesized futures?
Yeah.
So I would say leave the Mediterranean gecko alone until some wonderful undergrad or grad student comes up with the idea of they are coming up with damage. It's not that we shouldn't study it. It's that we shouldn't be labeling it invasive, getting people to freak out, because guess what politicians do? They hear that word and then they go, let's pass a law, let's put money, let's do this. Well, it's a scientist's job to say that that is not an invasive species, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem, is the definition's gotten loosey-goosey. And then I'd argue that we're doing way too much about the pythons in Florida and zero anything about the cats. And again, feral cats spread more than a dozen zoonotic diseases on a regular basis to wildlife, humans, and other domestics.
Yeah.
Now they're being linked to bird flu. I've seen 3 articles in the last 2 weeks with confirmations of bird flu from domestic cats, and it's killing big cats at zoos. They just lost something like 20 big cats at zoos in the last 3 weeks from bird flu contamination. And I mean, I don't know. I've seen plenty of feral cats at zoos running around before too. And I think they should be trapped and removed. Why are we allowing them to get so close to wild animals that are so, zoos hold animals that there's sometimes only 50 years left in the world. We're going to let a feral cat ruin that? It's, again, I think it comes back to, like, we have to use logic and empathy in reasonable, balanced amounts, or we're just going to end up with more problems.
So how many like Burmese pythons are really out there, and are they doing as much damage as is being presented in the media?
It's a tough one. So they have been in the Everglades since the 1970s. They're a very long, well-established invasive. The numbers are tough to manage. I definitely think tens of thousands is a very reasonable estimate. We estimate the tegus to be in hundreds of thousands. So
really, in Florida?
Oh yeah.
Or just
Southern Florida and the Homestead area, we estimate them to be between, when I started working with them more than 15 years ago, we'll say when I started doing research 10 years ago, the statistic I was given was that there was between 150 and 300,000. And
God.
They're only removing 600 to 1,000 a year between the trapper and Fish and Wildlife, okay? Between the two of them, maybe 2,000.
That's not doing anything. It's like a waste of time.
You're removing a fraction of what's breeding, because they breed, their fecundity is like 90, their hatch ratio is like 95% in captivity. And the ratios we've done from nest surveys in the wild. So they get about 85 to 95% hatch ratio. They have extremely high fecundity. We're talking the average female can have anywhere from 12 to 45 eggs, with your average being around 20, 25. And then you have a 85 to 95% hatch ratio. Some females can double clutch. And the ability to get them pregnant is, from what I've seen from breeders, 100%. Every one of their animals, they match them up. 1 male, 3 females is a standard, and they breed 100%. And so, yeah, tegus are extremely prolific. And we've done friends of mine, and my co-author, one of my co-authors, Walter Mashaka Jr., is an awesome guy. He's from South Florida. He's the Pennsylvania State Museum's vertebrate curator. Big guy who's done big stuff on like iguanas and Cuban tree frogs, invasives and all like that. And he's done tegu work, and he did a lot of stuff on the fecundity. And so I always use a picture that he did of a dissection of a female, and she's on the table surrounded by her eggs, which is at least 30 eggs, something like that. And I've used that picture in many lectures, because just a picture speaks 1,000 words for how prolific these tegus are. The pythons can breed much larger clutch sizes. Their fecundity and ratio does not seem to be as prolific. But it's hard. This is the tough thing. It's hard to estimate both populations. So I could look up numbers and compare numbers, and we could talk about that for a whole podcast, is the problem, because these are very elusive animals. We're using catch and trail cams, which are very biased sampling methods. The new stuff they're doing with the berms and the drones is really promising. But again, this is just really tough to locate. But I would say both are extremely established. And because the Burmese pythons and the tegus have such a diverse diet, it is a huge concern because even in numbers that aren't like millions, they're still able to put a huge pressure on an ecosystem. And sadly, the Everglades is a very damaged and fragile ecosystem that's dealt with, I mean, so many things from being, dug out and drained to the planting of all the melaleucas to attempt to drain it, which was a massive invasive tree that's spread everywhere. And it doesn't drain the wetlands. It just pushes out native species and it provides less habitat for birds and all that. It's really,
so you're saying humans have had an impact on the Everglades?
Oh, yes.
I'm
The
shocked.
Everglades,
I can't
yeah, right?
believe that.
The Everglades almost went extinct from humans. There was a 50-year period, we'll say 30 to 50 years of destroying it, followed by 50 years of recovery. But what happened is they were draining and draining and building, and then you started getting massive problems with saltwater leaching. So the salt water, because you remove all the mangroves and the storm surge protectants, now the salt water gets into the fresh water and was contaminating it. And that was the big move to save the Everglades. It was not driven by love for alligators. It was driven by the protection of they were losing their fresh water sources in South Florida. And so then they panicked and started rebuilding the mangroves and cutting and all these strict rules on resorts and how they can build on the beaches. Of course, you had storm surges, hurricanes, damage, and all that because, mangroves protect against hurricanes. Big resorts will not. And so it's eating the shoreline. And so that's all a big issue. But the Everglades is actually considered the most expensive and most successful American conservation restoration project in the history of the world. And it's like in the top 5 in the world. You'd like put it up there with like the healing of the ozone, which is the biggest global conservation success story. But it's truly one of the greatest in the world. If you want to, definitely Google it later, how the Everglades was saved. It's an amazing story. But it was a lot of really hard people fighting. And I don't know if you heard in the recent events, but I was a big part of the state park promotion. Basically, people who are in politics in Florida, I'm sure as you probably heard, were trying to silently rezone our state parks and turn them into golf courses, pickleball courts, and
hell yeah, that's what
the other
we
one.
need.
It was something else. It was like, and lodges. They were calling them lodges, but they held 300 people. They were hotels, and they were trying to rezone, including Jonathan Dickinson State Park, which is like one of my favorite places to camp in Florida. And just from Facebook advocacy and social media advocacy and protests, they were able to completely shut down that plan in Florida in under 2 weeks and remove not only like protect each park, but like change the laws and all that. A whistleblower in, I forget what department, was fired within the State Department, was fired for whistleblowing about it because they tried to do it silently. And like they named it like I forget what it was called. You might know because you're in Florida. It was it was like the Great Parks Initiative. Like, because the name, if you didn't know and read the lingo, you wouldn't know what was happening. We're just gonna add pickleball courts and tennis courts to open unused areas. It's gonna make the parks better. More people want to be there. But you looked at the plan; they were trying to convert Florida into their big golf course for their millionaire buddies and make it less nature and more human friendly, and rezoning huge areas of native gopher tortoise and American alligator habitat, shorebirds, spoonbill. But anyway,
more fertilizers, more pesticides.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
you're just introducing all that.
Yeah, and so, but it was one of the biggest bipartisan supports that our country's seen in the last decade. And literally everybody rose up and was like, absolutely not. We love our parks. You get out of here. And just bipartisan support, the power of when people come together to protect something that they understand the importance of. And so I'm very proud of Florida for shutting that down because that was very scary. And that's what Florida needs to do. It has incredibly rare habitat, scrubland, and wetland, and a variety of other very, very unique habitats that really need to be preserved. And the Everglades is actually a one-of-a-kind ecosystem in the entire world. It's a river of grass on limestone bed, and it's just, there's nothing else like it. And if people understand how special it is and that it's worth more intact than it is being chopped up and sold. But that's a very hard philosophy to sell modern humans on. But I'm proud of Florida because I was so terrified. I was like, they're going to cut up all my favorite parks when I lived there. Like, I was at Jonathan Dickinson 4 times a year camping. I love that place.
Yeah, and I think that they were trying to do something with the gopher tortoises too around the same time.
Yes,
where they wanted to make it where I don't know if they wanted
status, right?
Yeah, they wanted to change their status around the same time, which would then of course open up all this land to be able to just be freely leveled and developed. without the cost of relocation.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's frustrating, but I think we have to look at the positives. It was blocked. It was an incredible unification of people, and people need to realize that we things like biodiversity and protecting wildlife, their habitats, biodiversity in general, clean water, clean air, fertile soil. Like, these are not things that should be political. These are not things that we should be fighting about. We should be unifying and going like, yes, we need to protect the economy, but not at the expense of the environment. And this is actually a really whole cool concept called the ecological price tag. And it's very controversial in ecology because a lot of people say like nature has a value. We shouldn't have to put a price tag on it. I completely disagree with that. I think you absolutely have to, because so many people don't care. And I don't care if it's a religious reason or a financial reason or a I love nature or I love snakes. I don't care what the reason is. Find that reason, use it to get that person on your side to understand the benefit for both. And that's what it's about. So the ecological price tag is about literally economists and ecologists coming together and coming up with a value, like how much is a wetland worth per hectare? How much is the value of pollination from 2,000 native bees, which, yes, are being pushed to extinction by the invasive honeybee? And I've had biologists, you should see, post that invasive honeybees are invasive. You think the
are they really? Well, crazy. Okay. I thought that everybody loves the honeybee, though. So what's...
So the campaign,
educate me here.
So it's similar to the campaign of Got Milk. Yeah, this is a funny one. Similar to the campaign of Got Milk, which Got Milk was funded by the Dairy Corporation, who's been caught many, many times being super corrupt, right? And pushing milk. And no, milk above the age of 12 in high amounts causes way more bad than good. But that whole Got Milk campaign was wonderful because they paid Harvard to do some skewed studies. Harvard's been caught doing this a lot. In fact, one of my favorites, Google this: how big sugar shifted the blame to beef. So sugar knew that beef and sugar caused heart disease because they did the research first. Then to get ahead of beef, they basically did a massive campaign to show how beef causes colon cancer, heart disease, and all that, right, over the years. And the idea was to shift the blame so people didn't know about sugar. Sugar is just as harmful to your cardiovascular health as red meat. But people don't hear that because they were so successful at paying Harvard. The research they did at Harvard to study it was done on rabbits. So you're taking a lagomorph, an herbivore, and you're going to study how beef affects it. It was a very biased study. That's crazy. They were setting it up to get the answer you wanted, and they used that to push the studies. And so Harvard's, unfortunately, like, not to knock the university, but they did have their president retire recently in shame, and a few other people who didn't have degrees retire. Like, they've gotten in trouble a lot in the news in the last decade. It's kind of sad. Being an academic, it's shameful because you trust these institutions to, hold what they're supposed to. But that's unfortunately what happens when you have applied research. Sorry, looping back, where did I get on? Before I got into dairy, I had another story.
They're feeding rabbits beef. The rabbits got sick. Before that, I don't know. That's a fun fact. I didn't know that.
It was
honeybees.
Research.
The honeybees.
Oh, sorry, honeybees. Okay. So there was a massive campaign on bee conservation. And somehow, and I've done research on this, it's tough to understand if it was actually being done by the honeybee organizations or if it was just a big misunderstanding. But there was this big campaign to not be scared of bees. And I would like to say from the research I've done, it does seem geared from the agriculture industry's marketing. But everybody, for some reason, got so gung-ho on loving the honeybee. And the honeybee is the European honeybee. It is a domestic species or domesticated form of honeybee that comes from Europe. There are no native honeybees in the United States or North America. They come from Africa or they come from Europe. So everybody hears about these Africanized honeybees. They're just a slightly larger, more aggressive version of the European honeybee. Both are non-native domestic honeybees, but they don't tend to domesticate the Africanized one is not like, it tends to be like coming over on ships accidentally. It's not necessarily domesticated. Well, Europeans brought over as a domesticated, but they're both insects. I mean, domesticated's a loose term, but clearly the aggressiveness, but they both come over as honeybees and they both have established one way through ships by accident with the Africanized, and then the honeybees just from being on farms and just by moving. And even honeybees, they will advocate that they tell you not to kill them, and pest companies won't. They come and they fog them and collect them because they're worth so much. And then they will take them to other honeybee farms. And so it's similar to having like a loose cat or a loose cow or goat in your backyard. It's a domestic animal, but it is invasive. And the problem with honeybees, and the reason people get angry, like if you go on Facebook and are like, honeybees are invasive, you're going to have even scientists, and I've had some people get on me and be like, they're not invasive, blah, blah, blah. I raise honeybees. And it's like, they are, because they're everywhere where they don't belong. And here's the problem. We have 2,000 native bees, like our carpenter bees and sweat bees. And, some of our big or small, some look like flies, some look like moths. They're like all different things. Bumblebees, of course, everybody's familiar with. And these guys are specialized to certain flowers. And so the problem is with honeybees is they're super good at pollinating. They're like obsessive robots. They're just like ultra pollinators, but they only specialize on certain flowers. So they're going to, basically overdo and obsess and push everybody out of these flowers, but they're not going to pollinate everything else. And you have all these, thousands and thousands, if not tens and tens of thousands of wildflower plant species across the US. And our 2,000 native bees are specialized to those tens of thousands of flowers. And the honeybee is only going to get, and again, I don't know the number on them, but a select amount, very small amount. It's a specialty pollinator. And so all of these other species are going to be pushed out, which then means if there's nothing to pollinate them, the plants can't reproduce. So you're going to have this keystone effect, which is already happening. I believe there's something like, last I checked, 5 or 6 U.S. honeybee species have been listed on some level, and one is listed extinct from the Endangered Species Act. It's been, really tough. And a few are in Hawaii, so we were kind of rare. But a lot of these honeybees, like almost every species is, and some listing or level of threatened and concerned. And the problem is that the habitat loss, use to pesticides, and then the honeybee that is pushing them out. And so,
oh my gosh. And so this is
native species, but it will push them out. So it's
this is big honey, or like, is that a thing, or is it
because there was,
it's got to be, it's got to just be agriculture, right? It's just got to be
because I feel like the whole idea of like the don't kill bee education was meant to protect agricultural bees, because we have to also notice that honeybees, I should mention, like the reason people get offended by calling them invasive, and it's because we don't kill them, we don't manage them. Like you remove them, you put them back on the farm, like same thing with a cow. But because they are everywhere and putting pressure on the ecosystem, I don't see how you can't call them invasive. But they are at the same time dealing with their own issues. We need honeybees to do our crops, because we've moved from a system that was 97% small farms to 3% small farms within the last 150 years. Only 1 in 10 small farms raises enough money from the farm to actually support their family in the US. And that's because we've sold out to big corporate agriculture. So instead of families raising farms that are hundreds or thousands of acres, now you have hundreds of thousands of acres. Instead of raising many crops on a small farm of a polyculture and using a variety of farming methods and less pesticides and native pollinators, now you're creating a big monoculture of 100,000 acres of corn or soybean. Now you're creating a buffet for one type of insect. You're in a pesticide resistance battle with it. But at the same time, you now must obsessively rely on honeybees. And honeybee farmers are actually, and not to knock them, they do their job well. They're usually very conservation focused. I know a lot of them local in Arizona. I buy honey from them directly. Wildflower honey of the desert. And like they do it in a responsible manner. They manage their hives. And so honeybee farmers actually travel and move their hives all over the country. It's this incredible, worth Googling, very interesting how it's done. And there are risks of, yes, disease transmission and problems that come with that, but the way they're moving them around. But the honeybees are dealing with parasites and bacterium, and they're also having crashes. So you've probably heard of like colony collapse syndrome, and the honeybees are dying. So I do believe all this came from the agricultural industry, because there was problem and panic, and there's been tons of research on it. And so we need honeybees. But the only reason we need honeybees so obsessively is because we have created this system where only honeybees can pollinate these 100,000 acre farms. It's all unnatural. So we've moved away from very natural, safe, and small sustainable practices to a agrocorp lifestyle. And that shift is very hard to undo overnight. Just like, for example, if you're trying to get everybody to switch off of gasoline to some kind of alternative. You can't, I own an electric car. I use it for commuting. I charge at my house. There's no infrastructure. And it's great because it's good for me because of my choice. But, it's definitely not something I think that everybody should get, because they're exploiting a lot of rare minerals. And there's other problems with things like solar panels and electric cars. The idea is we can't all egg in our baskets, like all the eggs in one basket. We need to come up with a variety of solutions. And the idea is like everything's about diversity of solutions, diversity of agricultural practices. And just like an ecosystem is about complexity, when we take human stuff and simplify it to like one fertilizer, one pesticide, one crop being grown, well, now you have one pest. So now you need honeybees. So you're making this unnatural cycle, and then you trap farmers in a loop where they're basically being put out of business at an exponential rate. I'm not going to have time to get into genetic modified organisms, but GMOs are the same problem, where they're patented organisms. And now I'm a 100,000 acre farm next to your 1,000 acre farm, and I have my GMO corn, you have regular corn. Guess what? They throw their plant pollen or sperm in the air, and it just breeds, and then they sue the small farmer and put them out of business. That's the number one issue I have with GMO crops. They're not spreading cancer and allergens and problems. We hypothesized some of that. We studied it and showed that was not really a risk. We have some allergy concerns for some, stuff that hasn't been done yet. But like, for example, if you take a gene from a peanut plant, put it in a soybean, and your kid was allergic to the enzyme, they could die eating it. No, but that's never been demonstrated. It's just been hypothesized. So,
and they make crops that are resistant to glyphosate, right? So they can dump more glyphosate on it, and then then you're kind of consuming. We don't need more glyphosate, right? Because that's the thing. I saw something where it was like
causing cancer, really bad with Monsanto Corporation.
Yeah, and it's like every wine that's out there has a detectable amount of glyphosate in it now, which is like super depressing,
I heard that's horrible.
Yeah, and it is interesting. The honeybees. A friend of mine has honeybees, and he takes them by the semi truck out to California from Florida every year, and then makes his way back and like picks them up on the way back and drops them off, and like has a route. And the honey is kind of just a byproduct, right? Like they give us honey whenever we want it. It's like they don't even, it's not the main thing. The main thing is that they're going out and they're giving them to farmers. They're renting their bees out.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
It is. No, it's really interesting how they do it. And most of it's done very ethically. But like you said, it's difficult. And that is one of the benefits of GMO crops, by the way, is we can, like the most common GMO crop grown in the U.S. is called BT corn. And the BT is a capital B lowercase t because it stands for Bacillus. And I'm forgetting the rest of it. But Bacillus is the genus of that bacterium. And so it literally stands for like the initials of its scientific name, BT, and corn. So what they do is it's a type of bacterium that has the ability to kill caterpillars when it gets in their digestive tract. And so what they do is they snip out that gene, put it in the corn grows up, caterpillar eats it, dies. You don't have to use pesticides. So that is one of the great benefits of GMO crops. The problem is that the people making money on it are big agrocorp, and the people who need it are like small farmers and underdeveloped countries and things like that. So like the application and need they're very separated. And so it's too big of a big business thing. And so it's a very big problem. So the problem is that you kind of need to redo the entire system in order, to get, to get back to that point. Like we have to completely redo how we do agriculture, how we use energy, how we do transportation. And this idea that if we go to sustainability, it'll be a more balanced system for all. But that's the problem with capitalism. It's great to grow a country. It's never meant for long-term sustainability. Like in biology, if you grow exponentially in a finite, limited system, we call that cancer. But that's capitalism that expects infinite growth, but we live in a finite world with limited resources. And we still haven't woken up to that concept that we're going to be slowly driving ourselves, because fossil fuels, rare minerals, fertilizers, all that stuff is going to be, those chemicals and minerals and metals will all become more rare as time goes on, and will eventually run out. And the idea is we can keep drilling deeper and exploiting more ecosystems to get to these resources, with mining being the most damaging environmental practice in the world. If you Google the 12 biggest Superfund site, not super fun, Superfund, meaning it's a big government cleanup money project. The 12 biggest in the world, or the 12 most polluted places in the world, are Superfund sites or ex-mining sites. They're all mining sites. And so because we're not requiring the company to like fit in their budget to clean up when they're done. So even just government regulation and laws would help, but sometimes over-regulation is an issue. Like a lot of times, endangered species are so protected that we can't help them, which is what I deal with the burrowing owl in California, because they won't work with our artificial burrow methodology because of misunderstandings. And so it's like, it's protected to a fault. So there's problems with, I think the key comes down to not using enough science and history and decisions for our government, for our future, for our society. You think we would learn our lessons, but it's frustrating not to. But I think for the local people, I still believe that like we all make a difference. Like how you use your voice and your dollar in this country is one of the best tools you have. And it's a stronger power than most people have in the world. And that's through social media, through advocacy with friends and family or church groups or what have you, schools. With your buying choices as a consumer, you can drive change. And if we all do it on a small scale, it does make a big difference. But at the same time, it can't do it alone. You have to also partner with governmental change. So we have to vote, we have to lobby, we have to write and call our senators, even though that sounds silly, like what we were told when we were in high school. It works. And you can. And, you have to flood them with that information. And then things like you're doing, podcasts and documentaries and organizations where people are showing animals in the right light and giving the education value and taking back what all these media and networks did. Like I've lost so much respect for people like Discovery Channel and Animal Planet and all these people who have just sold out from anything good. So It's like, I like to think that we can take it back. I like to think that times are changing. It's not the days. Like I said, even Crutchfield has a much different philosophy moving forward. And I hope his new farm is much more careful on letting things get loose and isn't just establish a new invasive bubble. I hope people have learned their ways and change.
Well,
and improve. But
what do you think about the documentary that's in the works right now that's supposed to be centered around Tom Crutchfield? Because if it is centered around him,
it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah. Well,
Tiger King, Chimp Crazy, whatever the hell this is, it's going to be episode 1, 2, and 3. I mean, he was in the first episode of Tiger King with the snow leopard in the van that they're trying to go, it's old enough, this is fine, this is normal. And every normal human looks at it and goes, no, you shouldn't own a snow leopard. That's a critically endangered species. It belongs in breeding programs at zoos, not in your car. And this is not okay. And I think most people saw that and knew that. And the part that angers me is before and after the documentary came out, he provided footage. He knew what to do to the reptiles, but like a lot of celebrities, and he is in the reptile sector, like a lot of celebrities, they care more that any news is good news. It drives people. I mean, people want to buy from him and are going to Google his name more because he is in this and he's in this information. And I think people like him honestly care more about their image and their notoriety than they even care about money. I truly believe so. Like they want to be on TV. It sure seems like it. So,
you look at the Tiger King himself, and he just wanted the attention.
And the lady, have you seen Chimp Crazy? The main lady on that, I forget her name. Same thing. She's literally like, she's on a Zoom with she's like stolen this chimp. She's hiding it in her basement. And she's like being investigated by PETA and sued. And she's on like a Zoom like we are right now on the computer with the people, with the court, the judge, and the judge is talking to her and she's talking to the judge, and then she shuts the computer, looks at the film crew and is like, follow me, and goes in the basement and shows them the chimp. And so she literally showed that she's lying to the face of a judge, laughing about it. So no, she's facing like millions of dollars, like years in prison, like it's a whole. And even the film crew said we couldn't believe what she was like. She's just telling us, like she like acts like we're her friend. She's just saying it, like we're like, don't show your expression, don't show your expression. But no,
they're not going to use that footage or something. Like it's going to be like, oh yeah, we're just going to keep this between us. So, don't worry.
To answer your question, there's two sides to this. My first reaction and my earlier posts were very angry, like boycott, ban, especially, Jay's Reptile Zoo, whatever the heck he calls it. What's the full name of that situation?
Jay's Exotic Pets?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
He constantly pips eggs before they're born, not as a breeder who does it responsibly, but to put it on videos, and he kills animals doing that. His animals are morbidly obese. I mean, have you seen the pictures of him keeping like 20 retics in a room and like they're all like in a pile biting and trying to attack people and biting each other? I mean, his level of neglect and glorification of animal-based fear programming is disgusting. And I've been sent so many pictures and videos of his of the year. It's just appalling. And it's not like the worst abuse you've ever seen, but it's like when you bulk feed snakes like that, you're destroying their liver, you're destroying their kidneys. They're not happy. And you can tell these animals are stressed and miserable. And then he's also advocating that that's how they should look for people to raise their animals. So you got him.
But Rachel, he gets the views on YouTube, and that's what
Everybody's like, wow, that
matters.
snake is so big. And I'm like,
Yep.
and like when I go on his videos, I'll be like, it's not fun to make fun of obese people.
Yeah. Well,
these
and
fat snakes have feelings and they are not okay.
and him getting, you know, a snake off of eggs and it's flailing around and biting at him is just it does awaken something inside of you
Makes
as
your
a
skin
primate.
crawl if you understand the animal.
Sure.
And then someone who doesn't know, their skin crawls for the wrong reason.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've seen videos.
Scary.
I've seen videos on social media where a guy collected a retic from the wild and then had it in like a. I won't get too specific. I don't want to give away the individual. I want to protect myself.
Yeah.
But had the person indoors, and he's whacking it on the top of the head.
Oh my gosh.
With like an open hand to get it to snap and bite at him. And at the same time, he's holding like a caiman or an alligator, some crocodilian on the other hand.
Disgusting.
And he's whacking this wild retic on top of the head to get a reaction out of it. Anyway, so the documentary, what's it going to do to us? How's it going to impact keepers, zoos, and research, right? Because I've heard that this documentarian, this guy goes after, is that the right word? Documentarian?
I'm not sure. Journalist?
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll just say this
Trying
guy.
to get laws changed and to appeal. And I didn't think he was that far left until I saw how much PETA was on Chimp Crazy. And I know he's just telling a story, but like he definitely made PETA look really nice in that documentary. And that made me change my opinion a little more because I felt Tiger King was very justified. I feel like the outcome of both those documentaries, like I truly do not agree with private ownership of endangered and protected species like tigers and chimps. I really don't. If you want to become a nonprofit certified education zoo and that's how you own those animals, awesome. But keeping them behind locked doors in Texas like some weirdo like we see in these documentaries, I'm just not okay with that. Like he's keeping big cats like they're horses, and you know there has to be ethics as well. And just because they're mutant hybrids. But anyways, to answer your question, my initial response was anger, boycott, fury, and being infuriated. But after kind of connecting with some of my friends, particularly one of my best friends, Brian Hughes of Rattlesnake Solutions here in Phoenix, is really just awesome human being. And we've had a lot of talks on this and a few other people, but I really like his perspective, which is like, this is good. It was going to happen anyways. And we have time to prepare for it. And we have time to get ahead of it like we are doing right now and talking about it and giving our side. But the idea is that zoos and research institutions similar to Chimp Crazy and Tiger King are not going to be looped in the same. The biggest ones are going to get the hit are the hobbyists, but the hobbyists can get ahead of it by being advocates for safety, by standing up against people who are free handling taipans and whacking retics, which honestly blows my mind because the fact that this whole world, again, going back to bias, cannot see that as animal abuse. Remember that documentary Discovery did where that crazy guy tried to build a suit to get eaten by an anaconda, and they caught a wild anaconda and harassed it and tortured it to get it to bite him. It bit him, and that was the end of it. And like 3 million people tuned into that. I definitely tried to boycott that, and that's what I said. It was animal abuse. If they went and caught a wild tiger and did that, if they went and caught a feral cat and did that, you would have people protesting down the streets, PETA freaking out, but there is this big gap. So I'm interested to see how they're going to spin these guys in a negative light, but also having like, are they going to get investigated? Are they going to get in trouble? Like, is that why Crutchfield moved his farm? And like the timing seems a little hilarious, like as if they were doing it for the footage to show him as like, oh, he's the good guy. But we know these people are not going to be shown as the good guy. So yeah, I've come to Brian's perspective, which is it's going to happen whether it happens or not. And there are so many problems in the reptile industry. Like 1 in 10 person going to an expo is going to come home and take care of that animal and not kill it in the first year. You know, there is so little respect for these living things, like you said, whether it's a python hunt or, you know, people not, I mean, how many signs do you need to see at a reptile expo to not leave an animal in a container because it'll die? Like people don't even make it to their car with the animal alive.
Or they put it up on the dashboard.
Yes. Or even in Arizona, just in your car. You can even walk into the car without it covered in the bright sun, because our reptile expos are like August and June. Just walk into the car. If it's not covered or in a bag, they'll fry in your hands. So like, because it's 110, you know? So to me, it's this whole issue. But when this comes out, we can get ahead of it. We can be loud. We understand things are going to happen. But in a lot of ways, it's probably for the good. And I know a lot of reptile people do not want to hear that because unfortunately, and I know I've supported US ARC for years, but I've also had problems with US ARC for years because a lot of that philosophy is I should own it no matter what. This is my right as a pet owner. And I don't agree with that. As a conservation focused biologist, that is a living thing. That is a species. That thing has rights to exist. It has a right for its species to exist. It is being exploited in the pet trade. And your wants and desires as a human are piddles to what this species deserves. And we need to put aside our wants and needs and go, if you really want it, that species, you might have to train to be a zookeeper. You might have to go into an academic research institution. You might have to do this. But you know what? I can't perform heart surgery. I can't go read a radiology printout. I'm not allowed to do that because I'm not experienced. So why do we let so many people treat animals without the experience and knowledge to get there? And I'm not saying we need to make every ownership of exotic the level of a doctorate degree, but I think like even similar to like gun ownership, there's a little bit more we could do to try to make education mandatory. You can, for example, in most parts of the United States, there is more training required for the average hairdresser than the average policeman. And
Sure.
it's easier to obtain a venomous snake or a gun than it is a pink permit for driving a car before you have your license. So like, why is that? Why is this inconsistency? So I don't want to be like, let's get tons more laws, but clearly we can look at this and say there's a problem here. I think what we're all worried about, the outcome will be, is that the documentary will come out. Politicians freak out. We are very close at an election time. The timing is horrible. And people are going to choose this to make this their platform. And they may go and they're going to do what they always do, which is overban, overly strict laws. They're not going to listen to us, the reptile people or the scientists or the hobbyists. They're not going to listen to any of us. They're not going to listen to US ARC. It's not going to matter. And that's the problem is we've ridden this fine line. Like we're not in this exploitive endangered species poaching of the 70s and 80s when the book, The Lizard King came out. It's not like that. It's not like Tiger King now, but it's on this edge and we've allowed it to stay like that for far too long. And so, fear-based programming and low husbandry and low ethics has become the norm. So I guess the thing is that we know this is going to be bad, but it may be for the best. And it's tough. The hobbyists will lose, but the species will benefit. And I know that's probably the most controversial thing I'll say today.
Yeah. And
take my animals away. No.
Sure. Yeah. And I can both agree with you and disagree with you at the same time. And that's okay.
Oh, I'd love to hear your perspective on it. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, so I agree. So my biggest fear is exactly what you said, is that politicians never do anything nuanced ever. Right. And historically reptiles are there's a bipartisan hatred and sort of stigma against reptiles and reptile keepers. Mm-hmm. So that is my biggest fear, is that it's going to be an attack on the keepers and the hobbyists. But at the same time, I do agree with you that people just walk into shows and they buy things that they don't understand. Mm-hmm. And I know I saw somebody, I saw a guy walking around with, he was kind of far away, but I think it was an emerald tree boa.
Oh my God.
Holding the tail of it with it on his shoulders at a show. Like he just bought it and he's like holding a reptile cage.
I love that. When they just buy it and they want to hold it and hold it and hold it. And I'm walking by going, oh, that poor thing, please put it away. It's already so stressed. I've seen kids walking around with 12-foot retics they just bought and they're just wearing it. And it's like,
and the last show I was at, I'm walking and I hear what sounded like somebody took a big scoop of mashed potatoes and dropped it on the floor. And it was a ball python.
Oh no. That's
and
horrible.
It was like maybe a 9-year-old kid walking around with a ball python, and the mother's like, "What did you do?" And gets in the kid's face and everything. And it's like, "What did you do? You let your kid walk around with a brand new animal just like out in the open."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this kid's getting bumped and jostled around, and you're gonna come down on this kid.
It's not a toy. That's the thing. No, you're right. It's so frustrating. And oh gosh, no. And I'll tell you, because I'm not a big fan of reptile expos, but I do go to a few, and they're ones that I consider much more ethical. And in particular, they will invite me as a nonprofit booth, and I just do education, like walk around, talk to people, and I will try to interview ethical breeders and highlight, like I said, just highlight the good, show there's good.
Yeah.
And that's always my thing, is like, we talk enough about the negative. I really like to highlight people who are doing good things and breeding good things. And I mean, I am friends with some amazing tegu and lychee gecko breeders, and Retic Ranch, one of the biggest reticulated python breeders who's ever existed, is my buddy Greg Bryant in Florida. And he's an amazing human being. He invented a morph when he was in college. So like, I definitely don't want to be like knocking the breeders and all that, because I think when it's done right, like anything, like firearms, in venomous, it can be done amazingly good. But when I was there recently, I have done some work on color evolution with gray banded king snakes. And I was walking around and I came up to a gray banded king snake booth, and they had all these, adorable little babies, just little teeny neonates and all these little cups. And there's ones for $200, and then there's a bunch of these for $50, and they're marked NSF. And I was like, talking to her about blah, 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 and talking about my research and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, oh, what does NSF mean? And she looks at me and goes, I thought you were a scientist. And I was like, okay, what does it mean? And apparently it stands for something along the lines of they eat, right? So it's a gray banded king snake. So they eat other snakes. And so they've trained them to eat on pinkies. And so these NSFs for $50 are animals they haven't been able to get eating. So they're selling a baby snake that's never ate and will most likely die. And yeah. And I was like, well, that's never a term I would use. And I was just like jaw down, like, are you seriously explaining what you're explaining? And I had no idea that was even a thing. This was a very new thing to me, because again, I've avoided reptile expos, and I couldn't believe that, like, any breeder I've ever worked with, I don't care if it's a tegu or a snake, they make sure it eats and poops and it's healthy before it goes anywhere. And that's always a basic of reptile breeding. And I just couldn't believe they were willing just to basically throw these babies away and say, here's $50, good luck feeding it, ha ha ha,
Yeah.
So, and then her response to me after I'm sitting there and kindly sharing my research and talking, and I'm not being, and I think people get that misconception about academics. I'm not being down talking. I'm not telling her what degrees I have. I'm not flaunting. I'm just saying, hey, I do research with these guys. I love these snakes. Like, tell me about what you do. And she's asking me about what I do. And, like, it wasn't arrogant, but she immediately jumped to that point and was like,
Yeah.
So it's tough. I don't know. I feel like there shouldn't be so much divide between the science and the people. But I will say there was a quote in Chimp Crazy that has stuck with me since I saw that, and I am going to make it part of my doctrine, which is one of the whistleblower who on the chimp rescue, who's doing all the chimp breeding in that documentary. She says, the people want to always be like, look at me, but don't look too close, because if you're the right kind of person, you're going to see everything that's wrong. And that's exactly what it's about. That's all these people, what it's about. And I always tell people, I just had someone at my house yesterday who's a friend on Facebook. I'd never met her before. She wants to do rattlesnake relocation. She's retired. And I invited her over and I trained her how to use hooks and tubes and a few items. She'd already had her own equipment. She'd already done a few training classes and watched videos and done some things, and just didn't have people who could like train her one-on-one. And she literally came over. We worked with my rat snake, my hognose, and then my sidewinder, and just the basic hook stuff. And that's all she needed. She went through it wonderfully. She understood it. Now she lives an hour away from me, and now she can help her neighbors be educated in a retirement community, and she can relocate rattlesnakes. And I told her to use that, like, put down the shovel, pick up the phone, and call me.
Yeah.
She loved it. So it's that simple as spreading education, taking the time and doing that. And we can get more people on our side doing it the right way, because it's about education, not about look at me. But that's how I do my philosophy. Like, I always laughed. I said, my house might need picking up before you come over a little bit, but my reptile area is always good to go. I don't get cops could come over. Come look at my animals. I got nothing to hide. Everything's locked and coded and whatever, all the permits I need, So I think that has to be the situation, is that if you're going to show off your animals, it should be show off how awesome they are. Look at my husbandry. Look at these beautiful cages with live plants and eco mulch. Like, that's what I want to see people learn to brag about, and then brag about how safe you are, and flip the script on the fear-based programming.
Yeah. Well, and now something else I wanted to ask you about, because you brought up an endangered species.
Yes.
And I own endangered species. I have boa constrictor occidentalis, which is the Argentine boa, and they are classified as endangered
in the wild. Are they? I don't think they're restricted for CITES for captivity, right?
Well, yeah. So like, obviously they can't be imported anymore, and all that. So So yes, in the wild, they're endangered. Do you think that I should be able to keep them as a hobbyist, or do you think that that's not ethical? I mean, for me, it's like I could see it from both perspectives, right? If people were still smuggling them, and honestly, I have a couple animals that are allegedly Edgar Fortune line, and so those came into, I believe it was Los Angeles. They were being smuggled in from Argentina, got intercepted, and then were brought to the Seattle Zoo, and that's where Edgar Fortune worked with them, and he bred them, and then now they're in captive collections. So what are your thoughts on that? Ethically, is that acceptable? Is that unacceptable? Well, I'd
No,
like
it's a
your
great
opinion.
question, and that's why I think it's so important to like have intellectual discourse. Because from the start of our conversation, you'd probably assume that I disagree with you, and I actually do agree with you. I too have kept a species. In fact, the crested gecko, for example, is a great example of one that's critically endangered still in the wild. It was thought to be extinct for 60 years, and now it's a very common pet. Same with chinchillas. There's less than 250 chinchillas in the wild, and they're, what becomes unfortunate, as you mentioned, is without the wild stock, they then become a hybrid or a muddy version of what was in the wild. But what I really love is when you have, and I believe you are absolutely an ethical keeper, because we've talked and I did the research for, we did the podcast, all that, stalked you a little bit. But it's, and we're already Facebook friends, so I knew you. But like, my thing is that it's about how it's done. I don't want to ban automatic assault rifles. I want to make sure they're hard to get. I don't want to ban this or that. I might want to make them hard to get if they're dangerous. I think danger is one issue. But I think like having general standards for ethics and keeping is important. But I think we do need the ability for those things to be kept. And the reason is that zoos rely on it. There is so much that husbandry and hobbyists have done for zoos. I would say the vast majority of reptile and amphibian breeding, and to extent a lot of early bird breeding and mammal breeding, was done by hobbyists. If you even know the story of, like, for example, the Fort Worth Zoo is one of the oldest in the country. It was a guy with his own menagerie of animals who, when he died, donated to the city. And the easiest thing to do was convert it into a zoo. So, like, a lot of zoos, I mean, all zoos started as what they were called menageries. And they were famous in Egypt and England going back thousands of years. And so, modern zoo conservation is something that's new. And so zoos have not been as quick to breed things. And so we rely on that. And at the same time, hobbyists can be some of the best at protecting and exploiting ecosystems. We all know about removing our GPS coordinates from posting our herping spots and not posting mountain ranges. We actually like smudge ours, or we'll like double paste the mountain and make it duplicate. Like we do all sorts of funny things to hide it. So we do that to protect, where we're herping spot. But the same thing zoos have done. Like the Borneo earless monitor, the way it got into zoos, if you Google that one, was extremely exploitive. Like it was a research thing. They published a paper. A zoo found out, went there and basically stole them and brought them illegally in. Then they went into breeding programs. But because it's in a paper, they've been exploited locally. So they've had to do local conservation efforts in Borneo that have twisted. It's a really interesting story, but that's one of the best examples of like a zoo doing super. And I can't remember if the zoo purposely obtained the animal or they just received it knowing that it was taken or paid for the poaching. But basically the zoo obtained it knowing that that animal was taken illegally. But at the same time, then we were able to breed them and save them before they were lost in Borneo. So, and they're not lost in Borneo, but they're greatly threatened there now. So,
and that's going to be a big part of this documentary too, is showing kind of the somewhat gray area that zoos have been known to exist in, right?
And the modern zoo is very different than the past zoo. And I always like to make a difference between an AZA accredited zoo and not, because a lot of these rescues, that's a joke. There's no such thing as a reptile rescue. They're all somebody trying to bump their collection or resell stuff or whatnot. So that's why a lot of them become sanctuaries. I'm a big fan of Ty Park. I think he's a great guy. I think his choice to go from a breeder importer to a full zoo is beautiful. I'd mentioned that I think one of the greatest things we have to do is come together as hobbyists and breeders and zoos and scientists and academics and work together. And that's why I'm super excited, because I'm one of the board members for the International Herpetological Symposium, or IHS. And we're going to be at Ty Park's Iguanaland in June. And the first conference that's been hosted there, and first IHS has been there, and it's going to be very exciting. And
let me know when. I'm going to come by. And
yes. Oh, sorry. Let me pull up I've got to give the dates, because come on. But it's mid-June.
I'm like 30 minutes from him, so.
Oh, no Oh, you've definitely got to come. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you were that close. That close. Iguanaland IHS Symposium. Of course, I have like all this in my phone, of course, but okay. So with this, but what I like is that he switched to a zoo, and he's partnering with research. And what's great about IHS that I was getting to is that okay, here we go. All right, it is June 18th to the 21st, 2025,
Okay.
and we are advertising it as Fort Myers, but it is actually in Punta Gorda.
Punta Gorda.
Yeah,
Yep.
but it'll be So Guanaland, and it says it's on west, just south of Sarasota. And so, but they're advertising as Fort Myer like adjacent, so people know where it is. But
Sure.
technically Punta Gorda. But I love what he's done. I ordered animals for my study, imported and bred by Ty in the past. And I've kind of networked him through social media for years. And I just think he made a very ethical choice with the laws changing and wanting to do an educational thing. And having hands-on educational in-person programs is so important. So the documentary is going to be bad. We can prepare for it, but like going back to what you said, I do think you should have your animals because you're an ethical person. And if you're going to treat them right and care for them right and advocate that same, that's only going to be for the best. Because I mean, if someone comes up to me and tells me these animals shouldn't be pets, my first response is always, well, then I wouldn't have dedicated my life to trying to understand them and save them and protect them. Who's going to care for them? You have to get humans to care, which is why zoos are important. At the very least, you're cutting off the thumb to save the hand because you're educating people to care. And those animals are ambassadors for their species, which is what we call our animals that do education outreach, whether it's, cinnamon roll, the scorpion, or my sidewinder, or my rat snake, or my tegus. They're animal ambassadors, but they also deserve a cushy and comfortable life. And I think there's a lot of ethics, like, for example, Komodo dragons and elephants and chameleons. These are animals that lifespan is shortened by captivity. And there's elephants have gotten more research on and stuff. Komodos, they're really at a loss. Very few things can live in captivity. Of that, very few things can breed in captivity. And then of that, very few things can be re-released to the wild. So, we have to work and partner with zoos and all that. And the other reason I mentioned IHS is because it's a very unique symposium and that it's built half for the hobbyist zookeeper husbandry side and half for the more research sector. And it also does a lot more for undergraduates and students with like poster session and all that. And I'm leading the poster session this year. I'm very excited as a new board member. I'm the academic outreach one of two with Zach Lumen, who's a big herpetologist professor on the East Coast. And then I'm doing the lead for the poster session. So I'm trying to recruit professors and undergrads to help and be a part of this, as well as if you know anybody who has research. The goal of it is really what I believe in what IHS does. And so I think all I can advocate for people, like I said, similar to how I said it's how what you do on social media and how you spend your dollar. Well, you can do the same. You can buy reptiles from reputable breeders. I spend most of my time, almost all my animals are rescues or surrenders because I get them from other people who can't take care of them. And you get tired of doing that. So I think people have to be ethical. Breeders shouldn't just sell an animal. They should make sure the person can take care of it. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that means that it shouldn't be their main form of income. And I truly believe that. I think when your main form of income is breeding animals, you're going to sell your ethics along the way. And I think people who do it, from what I've seen, who do it as a hobby and a passion and not a main source of income, their ethics and the way they do it's completely different because you're not desperately relying on, I have to sell it, I can't worry about where it goes. We can't think like that. Like, these are living things. And even to an extent, I have a problem doing that with like dogs, the puppy mills and backyard breeders. And my dogs are all rescues too. And I'm not someone who's like, oh, you're not allowed to buy a purebred. You must adopt. Well, we need to be ethical. And there's ethics on the person who's breeding and what they're doing and not being stuck with the animal. And, they don't want to be stuck with it. And then you don't want somebody else to be stuck with it, dump in a shelter. It's very tough to not address the problems on the front end and just to blame the back end. But I would say I'm totally fine with people owning things, whether it's endangered or not, because you might be the person. And this is also why I will give Tom Crutchfield some props, because he does deserve some respect in that he's been a breeder of some very rare species that have helped many zoos. And that's why a lot of people have respect for him. But you can't poop in one hand and fill the other with sugar and expect me to want to eat at the table with you. There's still poop in this hand. I can't eat the candy bar, So, but I still give them credit in that a lot of these husbandry people have been the first to breed. So I do think we should own them. And trust me, I'd have a rhino in a heartbeat. Okay. I plan to have a zoo when I retire. I want to do that. But we have to have a line. And so it's tough. How do we how do we get people to do it, but enforce they do it the right way? But when the politicians and laws never do the laws the right way, I feel like we're stuck.
Well, yeah,
washing
that's the
machine of
problem.
precedents.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that it gets so inaccessible, where to the point where you would have to break the law to be able to get the animal, right? Like so many of the laws, once they're on the books, it's like, well, that's unattainable. I can't do that. I like, for me, I don't think I can get a Burmese python at all ever in Florida. Exactly.
But
right.
go to Ohio, you can get one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is that like once these laws are on the books, it makes it unattainable. And for like a regular person, and so that's my fear with this documentary, is that it's going to create a bunch of laws that's going to make animals unattainable.
It's going to be scary.
Venomous, I think it's going to be bad news. I mean, venomous is already, it's very difficult to keep venomous in Florida. So yeah, it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
I think.
And I'm glad we have US ARC. I mean, it's really all we have. I just think there needs to be different levels of advocacy done. And the laws frustrate me too, because they're only banning the animals after they're so ingrained in the system. There's nothing to do about it. And then you look at their laws, like, oh, we're gonna ban the green. I forget, like they banned like 3 of the anacondas, but not the other 2. And like it was they're like loosey goosey picking how they do it, and it's just
the scrub pythons. The scrub pythons in Florida. It makes no sense. Yeah.
Common sense with how they do the laws and the animals they pick for the list. And the thing is that, like, as invasive species researchers, we already have a database like of invasive species and their likelihood and their predictiveness. And we can actually predict invasive species likelihood and say, hey, let's not make Cuban tree frogs and Cuban night anoles that no one cares about anyways most of the time, a really cheap, fast import into reptile expos, because that's where they came from. How many people do you honestly know that own a Cuban tree frog or Cuban night anole or even like a Haitian brown anole? Any of these animals, they're not really owned as common pets, but they were brought in so cheap, like they were like they have penny animals, and they were brought in and just flooded these markets so quick, and everybody just came home and said, and their mom said, like you said, the Apollo python was dropped. What is that? Let it go. And now they're invasive everywhere. So I don't know. It infuriates me too, because it's like, for example, like savanna monitors. Very easy to captive breed, no problem with captive breeding, but they are 90% cheaper to just pull out of garbage dumps as eggs, hatch, and ship to the United States. And I understand they're very abundant, but that's horribly unethical. Like, why are we, and Euromastic, same thing, why pulling out adults out of their hole, selling them, and they live maybe 2 weeks after the Reptile Expo, and they're a 20-year animal that you pulled out of a hole in Africa and shipped. So, like, to me, I definitely have a hard time with wild caught. I think the regulation of the genetic flow and management of wild populations needs to be highly regulated, like way better in this country to be like really like I really think there should be collection permits. I don't think having a hunting license where I can go literally collect or kill almost anything in Arizona that's not protected with a basic hunting permit for $30 a year is not good enough. And I know a lot of people like that, but I don't. Like, I would like it to see where maybe it's not as hard to get as a red-tailed hawk for education, which is like very, very hard, but it takes like 5 years. But maybe it's something that like at least takes like a background check, an interview. I mean, one of the things I liked about the venomous requirements of Florida, where I did get my license, was they inspect your house. They actually require you putting venting and netting in like the vents, and the room has to lock, the cages have to lock, they have to all be labeled. Like, I like that level of like, if you're going to keep venomous, like, we're going to inspect your house once every 5 years, and we're going to see your setup before you even own anything. And I kind of like that for venomous and certain exotics. When it comes to venomous, and when I said like my comment about like feeling weird about people owning endangered species, like, but using mostly like, and again, chimps really aren't necessarily endangered, but but like going to exotics like that, I think the biggest problem is it's not that the animal's endangered, it's that they either A, don't have any checker background going into them to make sure they're experienced to keep the animal, and 2, they don't have the means to keep them. Like, how many people have the means to give a tiger what it needs? Even most zoos don't have enough acreage to give a tiger what it needs, which is miles and miles of habitat. What about a chimp? I mean, we see that show where she's locking it in a basement by itself, and she's like, it's a humanzee, and she's feeding it McDonald's, and it's opening its dip cup and dipping, and you're actually dipping its chicken into the dip. And
I'm so glad I didn't watch that.
Oh, it's honestly, it's much sadder than Tiger King, but it's just as crazy. not almost, it's almost as funny, but it's worth watching. It's, it's terrifying, but it's a humanity, and she's dressing him in clothes, but he's locked up and he's alone. And they just show footage of this life. And then they do show footage when he's relocated to this chimpanzee primate refuge where they have these big islands surrounded by water. And it's just a massive refuge in Florida for, I believe it was in Florida, for chimpanzees. And him living like a wild chimp. And it's like, he's a wild animal. He doesn't belong locked in a basement room. And to me, it's like, that's why the director had mentioned, he called it chimp crazy. It's like they lose their mind and they can't see beyond their own perception that this animal is being tortured. Like, these chimpanzees in this documentary, they of course go into all the documentaries and look at like the one that like ripped the face off the woman. And by the way, she had another chimpanzee in less than a year, illegally purchased with somebody else in Florida and then brought it to her house back in that state. And they said she'd be like locked up for a very long time if that ever happens. I wonder if she's going to get some legal actions. But these people are keeping them like kids on chains and in clothes. And and when he talked about, he's like, it's like they've lost sight of the fact that like what they're doing is so selfish. And so these animals, like they showed some of these chimpanzees on footage before they attacked people, and they're like rocking and they're in the fetal position and completely abnormal behavior. And it's like, no wonder it attacks somebody. Like, you are literally torturing this animal that is a social animal and locking it to be by itself, except when you come down at the end of the day to say hi to it and play with it. And it just, to me, it's like, most people do not have the means to give proper husbandry and care. So that's the first problem. And then the second problem is, how can we enforce the level of knowledge and education to care for them properly? And then like zoos, the people are so underpaid, the qualifications are so high. It's like, where is the middle ground for how to do this right? And I feel like we need more people, just like as an advocacy and conversations on this, because the politicians aren't going to listen to us, and they're going to make over restrictive laws unless we get out front. And I don't know how much we can do before this documentary comes out, but you're right. I think it's a terrifying time. And I think people, just like the law changes with the tegus and the farms, they have to be ready to move if they really want to keep their animals. Nobody wants to see what happened in Florida with the nail gunning of that guy's pets. God, that was one of the most, and I've used that in multiple lectures. And I bring that up as a point of saying, this is what happens when the laws don't work right, because you're letting all these cats, again, run loose. You're not managing them in any way whatsoever, but you're nail gunning people's pets, and you're not even aware of what species it is when the cage is labeled and he already told you. And how is nail gunning someone's pets a proper use of your time removing invasives, which are outside? Your butt should be outside and removing invasives. And I understand they need to enforce these laws, but this person from the videos and stuff I saw was, yes, he was holding on to his animals illegally, but they were properly cared for. They were in proper cages. Like, why is this the person you're focusing on? This is someone that a neighbor whistle blew on. I don't know the whole story, but I imagine it was some kind of a whistle blow, and they're just trying to make it look like they're acting tough because
I think that was when they started regulating the retics, and he had the grace period.
Oh, that's what it was. He had so long, he didn't.
He elapsed the grace period, and I think got an extension. I can't remember the specifics, but I do know that he had a boa constrictor that was pregnant or gravid.
And she was a legal animal to own.
Totally legal. Yeah, totally legal in the state of Florida.
Very expensive animal from what I'd heard.
Well, yeah, and especially if you calculate in the
babies. I know they said something that was like a value of like 10 grand. I don't know. In your opinion, was that a realistic value, or was it pumped up for the media?
I'm not sure. Who knows? How many babies did it have, and what was the morph? And then at that point in time, right? Because like the morph market is, it's all over the place, and that, we looked that up on the show the other day. There's like almost 40,000 ball pythons on Morph Market for sale right now.
40,000 ball pythons.
Yeah. And so if you go on Craigslist right now, it just in your area, if you have it down to 20 or 50 mile radius, you're going to find a ton of ball pythons that people just don't want anymore. And it's mostly, just like you said, people that go to an expo and they see a snake and they're like, oh, it's a $40 snake and I can boop and, all that.
And, oh, look at the color and blah, blah. And, and then not to mention the diseases like the yellow fungus that is being spread rampantly from bearded dragons and ball pythons. It's a major issue. Like, I do not buy animals from expos. I will buy them directly from a breeder when they're not at an expo, and I still quarantine the animal. there's a process that has to happen. It's tough, but Morph Market and kingsnake.com, and it's just, it amazes me that Fish and Wildlife and all of them don't have more time to browse that, because there's a lot of illegal stuff going on, and it's really terrifying how just.
Well, I'm sure Morph Market is up and up. I know that they're doing a lot of
the others. Yeah.
And I know that they're doing a lot of ethical things as far as shipping during holiday weeks. They're going to put an end to that.
Good.
You know, so there's a lot of good being done.
I didn't hear that. That's really good to hear.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good that is happening, and I think that everybody is seeing the writing on the wall that, like, hey, if we don't do the ethical thing, we're going to not be able to do anything, you know, and it's going to be gone. Do we have time to talk about venomous, or do you gotta go?
Yeah, so we're at about 2:40. We can go for another 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. I was making sure I wasn't getting blown up.
So venomous snakes. What, you know, we've kind of talked about the whole free handling trend that's going on. I think it's always been a thing. I mean, so you're in the venomous world.
Yeah.
It has that always been a thing? Has it been magnified lately? You know, and how bad is that for responsible venomous keepers, right? Because just like the responsible people that are keeping boas and pythons, such as myself, and I'm sure, you know, everybody that's listening to this podcast, then you have the people that are doing it wrong, and they're letting their python go and all that, and that's how we lose our rights. Mm-hmm. And is that sort of the same thing that you see in the venomous circle?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the famous incidents in Florida where the Burmese python was sleeping in the unlocked cage in the I believe it was a 3-year-old child's room, and got out and killed the child. And and it was at a time when the animal wasn't microchipped. It wasn't in a locked cage. Like, if you look at that story, it violated every single rule. So it's frustrating. I worked in Florida with they're two of my best friends, Zach Dion and Phil Wolf, and they're hobbyists. And that's why I said I have a long history with underground reptiles, because they kept animals there and had them as a vision. The company had a venomous display permit, one of the only ones that was not a zoo in the state. And it's a pet store where you could walk in and they had venomous. And so I had just walked in one day and started talking, and Greg, the breeder of the retics I told you about, he was actually the manager of the store at that time. And that's how I met him. And he's a super good guy. I didn't meet the owner and the nightmares of that until later. That's a whole nother podcast for another day. But I'll try to talk too negatively in general, because I know I'll get like some weird messages today on my messenger from some underground reptile people being like, "Are you on that podcast?" They do that occasionally. But I'm like, you know what? Then don't be unethical. I'm sorry. I talk about it. It's going to happen. It's like, you know, you can't, you know, you just got to be careful, you know, how you do things. And when you don't hide it at all. So in particular, I was doing venomous training there because I had just walked in and they had venomous, and it was like, hey, you can learn how to do this. And I was like, I would just like to learn how to do this because I plan to go to South and Central America and I want to learn how to work safely with venomous. And thankfully, my two friends were extremely safe. They each owned a collection of dozens of venomous. I mean, in the first 6 months, I'd worked with easily over 50 species. By the end of my 5 years in Florida, I had a species list of about 150, 175, including, gaboon vipers and mambas and rattlesnakes and cobras. And I know somebody asked me how many cobras I've worked with, and I said, I haven't counted, but probably over 100 cobras and at least a dozen, maybe 8 to 12 species of cobra. So including spitting cobras. So I was just interested, not for like I want to touch venomous. I was just like, these are cool animals. I had never even seen a venomous snake in person before, not even at a zoo, because, this is back in 2005, 2006 when I first moved to Florida. And, 2008. I moved to Florida in 2008 and graduated undergrad, and I was there for 5 years. So, 2008 to 2013-ish. And, during that time, I was able to train with venomous and train safely. I was able to go, herping in the Everglades and find cottonmouths and, pygmy rattlesnakes and things like that. And my friends just had a big collection. We would literally just go 1 day a week to underground reptiles and 1 day a week to my friend's house, and we would just like clean and feed the collection there under the supervision of my friends. And the idea was that they could, keep them because like they had a big collection, so they could keep extra underground and use it for that. And it was a good situation. Or I don't know if they paid rent or how it even worked out. But over time, we eventually stopped using underground and we only did our friends' houses and their snakes. My friend did have a venomoid banded cobra that we would free handle, and we wouldn't take video, but it was a venomoid, meaning that the venom glands were removed surgically. He bought it that way. It never tried to bite. It was very calm. It never hooded. And so arguably the animal was fine with it. There was no risk. And that's the only venomous I've ever free handled. And he also had a venomoid king cobra, but that was before I had met him.
Is there a way to verify that it doesn't have venom anymore, or
it's sad. So it's similar to like declawing cats or cutting dogs' ears, docking ears. It's very controversial. So a vet is going to go in and they're actually going to remove the entire venom gland, which if you see the size of venom glands, that makes the entire skull collapse. They definitely.
Oh, no.
So if you see a venomoid, they'll have a collapsed skull with like 2 divots like that. Or some vets will put in an implant and then stitch it. Now, I have heard that venom glands, to some extent, in some species can regrow. But that's not common. And for the most part, I don't know. I from what I've heard, it's pretty cruel and unethical. I've had friends do it with like this friend. He'd paid for one, and then I think he had also bought one that was already done. I think that was the king cobra. And I had another friend do it same, but it was a vet in New York, and you would basically mail your snake. It would live there for 2 months, and it was a lot of money, and then they would, just do the surgery with the implants, and they would mail it back. But the animal got painkiller, anesthesia, proper medication. Like it's a full surgery. And so arguably it's not any different than getting the declawing or the ear cut, but a lot of people still feel about it. But a lot of them are done unethically without the right painkiller and with the face deflated. I just think it's a lot of work instead of just, having an animal. And they agreed over time, like they stopped doing that. And it's still something that's unethical, but I think it's definitely up to the individual on that one. If it's done by a veterinarian and done right. But I don't know. It's tough.
But then why have venomous?
It's a weird thing. It's also, it's like, for example, people declaw big cats. Like people actually will get servals and caracals, these 50, 60 pound big cats, and they will get them and have them normal. But some people do that, and they will actually have veterinarians declaw them and file their teeth down. And not only is that a problem with the animal's behavior, big cats are so heavy that they get arthritis that cripples them at usually 1/3 to 1/2 their lifespan because of the declawing procedure on big cats. Yeah. So to me, it's like the person is an issue, and that's an unethical choice. But the veterinarian should know better. They should not be doing these surgeries on these exotic animals. I think that's where it should start. But and so it is like, what's the trend of the venomoid? So that's its own unethical thing. But I would say for the most part, if things were free handled or done unsafely, anything I was seeing, it was never on camera. That's the big difference. I think people were always stupid, but it was probably like invite your friends over and be an idiot. My friends were incredibly safe, and I was lucky to be trained by them. But even the methods I learned, where I was learned to, put a hook in, grab the tail, and we're not talking rattlesnakes. We don't tail rattlesnakes. We need a big hook, and like gaboon vipers, 2 hooks. But like with things like mambas and cobras, they're long. I'm only 5'2". They grab your arm, they grab the hook, and I personally like the tail. So you bring the tail, you grab the tail, you do the hook, and you do it like this, right? But in recent years, I've met people who are very big advocates of no flesh to scales, or excuse me, no hand to scales. And the idea being that there's no reason to touch them. Like just use a big hook or a clamp and gently move or move them. And the idea is the less contact they have with us, the less they'll associate us with like a danger or response. And so there's definitely different levels of venomous handling. What we do know is that free handling or really working with venomous at all with any type of equipment, it's not if you get bit, it's when you get bit. And if you have that mindset, you're going to be safer. 2, we know there's no such thing as a bite-proof glove, boot, or pant. And so using tools like tubes and tongs and hooks make us safer, but it's similar to sex. Condoms make you safer, but it's not safe. And so you have to go into that realizing that. And that's why it's so important to keep...
Especially if you have a latex allergy, am I right?
Yes. Well, I do have thick, with I use it with tegus because, and it's honestly for scratches. I don't feel like manhandling and fighting with my juveniles every day. I have 3 tegus and one's a juvenile. He's going through puberty right now. So I have elbow length Teflon leather coated welder gloves. And when people come over, they assume it's for venomous. And I'm like, Like, please, these are for my tegu's claws. So I don't have more scratches ripping up my beautiful tattoos, leaving pitted holes that I have to keep touching up 3 times. For some reason, every scratch or bite has only happened in this arm. Now, I will say I've been put in the hospital twice by tegu bites, and everybody laughs and goes, oh, tegus are just puppy dogs. They're the wish.com monitor. And I'm like, they have 1,000 newtons of jaw compression. That's double that of a pit bull and half that of an alligator. And when they latch on, trust me, you're going to rip open your hand just getting them off, which is what happened to me. And I don't know if you can't really see on the Zoom, but I can send pictures later for the podcasters. But about like nearly the size of a quarter on both sides of my arm, fat and muscle hanging out like 3 inches out of my arm.
What?
Oh, yeah. And I was in an ed program. So I like safety mistakes because, I'm a big safety advocate, but you learn by making mistakes. And if you make a mistake and learn from it, it's fine. That's what the journey in life is. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't need to guilt people. But when you're purposely putting yourself at risk and making poor choices and then repeating them, like having a venom allergy and then continuing to hold the same type of snake, which unfortunately is how we lost Dingo this year. And it's heartbreaking because he's someone who went from very unsafe practices to incredible conservation and safety over time. But I still would scream, you're a father and a husband and an educator to millions. Why would you continue to work with the lapids with a lapid allergy? Why would you take the risk? Because again, it's not if you get bit, it's when you get bit. And you've already been bit and you already know it. And antivenom won't save you. So why? And to me, it's like, I can't really necessarily call it a freak accident like Steve Irwin was a freak accident. He was the first person to die from a stingray sting in like 70 to 80 years. He took it in the heart. He was in the middle of nowhere. There was nowhere to respond. It's a decoagulant venom. Like I've swam with stingrays 50 times in my life. Like I've even gone up and harassed them. Like a little bit. Like I don't know. I've seen that for years. Like I know my limit. I know where they can throw that stinger. I mean, I love petting them in zoos. One of my favorite things is fondling stingrays. But you got to know your limits and your safety and stuff. And the thing is, if he'd been stung anywhere else in the body, it would have been a cold compress. He wouldn't even have gotten emergency help. And so we got to divide between freak accident and preventable accident. But I will tell what happened to me. So I was at an ed program. My animal was horny and hungry. And I did not respect his situation because we were already at the program. The program was ending. I was trying to minimally use him. And I was sitting on the floor talking to people about how they were more dangerous than a bearded dragon. And he climbed in my lap and I went to move him and he grabbed me like this. And I just peeled him off, took him down, pulled my lab coat down, tucked my arm because I could feel like the warmth of the blood, and then I just put him away and they were like, are you okay? I go, yeah. I go, sometimes it's very important not to be distracted with animals and mistakes happen. And I'm going to have to bid you good day. And they go, okay. And I walked them back as I go white as a ghost. I should mention, I was finishing my master's degree and I was the animal staff biologist of a Pet Supplies Plus, and I ran their animal department and did ed programs. They made this weird little position for me while I finished grad school. And so thankfully there was only 3 people with just a little ed program at the back of a pet store, thank God. But I walked the back and I was white as a ghost and I said, I need to go to the hospital. You need to call. And I was shaking and I was already in shock, shaking. And the guy goes, hold out your arm. He had 2 holes in the fat and he goes, okay, put it back. I'll call. And they ended up calling my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and he drove down and grabbed me and drove me 2 miles to the hospital. And the whole ride there, they're not effing cats. They're not effing cats. You need to be more careful. And he was yelling at me the whole way. And I'm like, I know. And you're so in shock. It actually doesn't hurt at all, which is, I tell people, when you see these graphic videos, problem is you don't realize it. And I knew, because I will say this was my 3rd bite by a tegu. The other 2 times were holding them down, pulling blood, doing the study, occupational hazard, but I had scars in the middle of my arm. So when I got to the ER and the doctors, basically all they did was rinse it with saline, trim it up, and look at it. And he looked up some peer review. He couldn't find anything on a tegu bite. And he asked about them. I'm like, look, their mouth really is not like a monitor lizard. They're an omnivore. They don't have, they're not eating rotted and dead stuff. They're not fully meat diet. They're not going to have as much of a risk like a cat or a monitor bite. So the risk of infection was low. And he looks at it and he goes, but what are those? I'm like, well, that's my last bite. And And he goes, don't you think you should change an occupation? I go, you put yourself at risk of aid needle sticks every day. I'll take my occupation. And he laughed. The ER doctor thought that was the funniest thing ever. And I was like, yeah, occupational hazard. You choose yours. I choose mine. Human diseases? No, no, no. I will I could go without an arm. I can use one arm, like whatever, I got a hand.
So you're saying you haven't learned from your previous mistakes?
I will say I did. So what the recovery was, wet, it couldn't stitch it because it would triple the rate of infection. So I had to do a wet gauze bandage changed 3 to 5 times a day for, I think it was about 5 to 8 weeks. And it was just wet gauze, meaning like, yeah, it's actually wet because dry gauze sticks, scabs, and rips off, which is what the hospital did to me. They actually dry gauzed me, sent me home, and gave me wet gauze packs. And so removing that was actually the worst situation. But my arms swelled like a baseball on both sides. You had to hold it up. You couldn't put it down because of the blood rush. No, I will say that was very traumatic. That was after working with tegus and owning them for 10 years and only about 2 years into my study, which was about 8 years ago. And it was very traumatic. It was a big wake-up call. And I have a new rule. You never take your eye off of them. Because a tegu, like most reptiles, tells you everything you need to know with its body language. And tegus are weird. It's in their eyeball. And if you look at the eyeball, just like a parrot, they kind of tell you what's going on. And if you take your eyes off them, it seems like it happens in a second. But that animal, I guarantee he tail wiggled. I guarantee he looked at me. He gave me the evil eye. He tilted that head. There was probably tons of responses. Even when he's climbing on my lap, he wanted to go away and he wanted to be fed. And he's smart enough to say he was asking for that. And I wasn't respecting the animal. I was too worried about the people. And so for me, it's definitely shown me that even a tame animal, he never bit me before. I raised him from a baby and he was about 6 years old. So this is an adult animal I raised from a baby. So like, it's you have to respect the animal. You have to keep your eye on them. You have to do that. And I thank God I've never had that instant sense, but it's funny that I've had 3 bites and they were all within about a year and a half of each other, like all within a year and a half time span, after 30, 20 years of reptile experience and 10 years of tegu experience. When does it happen? It happens when we become confident, comfortable, and complacent, the 3 C's. Do not become that. You want to always have a little imposter syndrome. You want to always have that humbleness. You always want to have your eye on the animal and be alert. And you're alert to their respect of their body language of what they're trying to communicate with you because they're not able to talk. And that's so I would say I definitely learned. But the first 2 bites weren't, they were just little nibbles. I mean, they definitely cut open my arm and like one went to the hospital because I was worried about infection. That's why I knew there wasn't an infection risk the second time. And they had just broken the skin and both times had broken the skin, but it's like almost like a jagged red, like bite, just a chomp, They hadn't removed anything. This time, the ER doctor thought it was pretty funny. He's like, your animal ate you, right? Like a good chunk of you. And he did. Like there was a significant amount missing. There was nothing on the floor. It was either hanging out or in his belly. He had definitely taken it with him when I pulled him off and he had gotten food from me. Pretty brutal. So, and I don't blame him.
Thank God it didn't hit like an artery or anything with all that right there.
It chomped like this sideways. And so luckily it was on like the sides, not like this, but that's exactly what the ER doctor had said too, is that this is getting dangerously close to a, where, if he had turned and ripped, it could have pulled out my wrist. And, it is very dangerous. And it's funny that all 3 bites have happened there. So I laugh that my tattoos they've only had to be retouched once and it was a scratch from a damn goose, honestly. So it wasn't a snake. And a bramble bush chasing a quail on a BioBlitz grab and like pulled some of my color off. But I laugh that all my bites are like right here in this strip. And that's why I don't tattoo over it. Because I joke that my left arm has become my CV. That like, oh, this short little girl doesn't work with big reptiles. Yeah, I do. But I'm not looking to add to the CV. I'm happy where it is. But I think sometimes it's just like, I don't know. I learned that same philosophy when learning to ride a motorcycle. It's not if you fall, it's when you fall. And if you have that mindset, you go into it safer. But I think that's the problem is the lack of confidence isn't like, and the bites aren't happening on the early side. They're happening on the later side. It's when you become too confident. And so I think it's important for us to stay like you got to stay rooted. And so like one of the venomous snake tricks that my friends taught me over the years was they would say you have to take mandatory smoke breaks. And although I don't smoke cigarettes, and some of them did, some of them didn't, they said like you have to stop, because if you're doing, let's say, 30 venomous cages, like a lot of them had these type of collections, and you want to take like, you know, a break every 5 cages. And the reason is, not a smoke break, you go outside and breathe air, whatever, you know. But the point is to take a break, separate yourself from the situation, and get back in. And then you're not going monotonously from cage to cage to cage to cage to cage. And that's why I'm also a big fan. Like some people take off all their locks and then they lock them as they clean them. I unlock and relock as I go, because I don't like the idea of all the cages being unlocked. What if I'm in a hurry and I need to get out of there? You know, like, and to me, it's like I can just know where I start and stop. And I use sticky notes on the glass just to say like who needs to be cleaned today, who needs to be cleaned next. And that way I can tell like when someone poops, whether it's new or old, and you have a big collection, you know. And that's what I do like at my lab to help like the few of us, you know, stay on top of taking care of our collection at Loma Linda, you know, as we kind of divide that work. So, you know, I think that's kind of what we have to do, is we have to be like all on the same page with that, and just understanding that you shouldn't have to wait to get injured to learn. But unfortunately, I think it does change your perspective. I've luckily never had that like loose safety protocol of venomous. I've worked with them all. I guess I should probably mention that I currently own a adult female yellow anaconda, Eunectes notaeus. And so she's about 40, 50 pounds and about 11 feet. And then I have a 4-foot white-sided or licorice morph rat snake, who's our ed animal, and then a Sonoran sidewinder rattlesnake, and a Mexican hognose. And
Okay.
Sonoran sidewinder and the Mexican hognose, even though all 4 are captive bred, those 2 are our native species. And so, and then I have a variety of tarantulas and arachnids that are venomous, but I do freehold those, but they're, you know, like I said, at risk with those, a little lower risk. But I think when it comes to that, my Sidewinder is the first and only rattlesnake or venomous I've ever owned. I did want to own it to have more experience with the species in particular, because I was interested in it, as well as just owning venomous myself. Like working with them solo had just never been something I'd done, except like in nature.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do it, but I do not, and I would love a gaboon long term. Honestly, they're my favorite venomous West African gaboons. Not that I don't love East African, but I love the big Westies. So, you know, for me, it's like I like working with them. I like the experience. But, you know, venomous for me was more of a hobby of like, I want this to train. And it was more of like a practical skill I saw that I could use to travel in like South and Central America and to be safe. And I did when I went to Brazil, you know, after my venomous training, one of the first things I did was to go to Brazil in about, 2014. And I lived there for about 6 weeks and did a regional field study through my master's. And when I went there, my professor, who was an entomologist, was like, "Oh, you won't see any snakes. It's winter in Brazil," which is July, but it's winter in Brazil. And I was like, And I made my snake hook the basis of my duffel bag. I actually duct taped it to a board of wood and made it the basis of my duffel, so my duffel had a frame. And I took it there, and you better believe we removed 3 fertilances, 2 neotropical rattlesnakes, and 1 neotropical coral snake in the 6 weeks I was there. And all with the Venom Research Lab, all were found on our 20 hectare campsite or in the hiking trails surrounding it. And I was the only one, not only with a snake hook, but with the training within a 6-hour radius, who had the ability to do that. And yeah, and one of those was my I guess one of the coolest stories of my life was it was a baby. It was our plant biologist. Actually, he's the one. He's a good guy named Sean, and he actually hooked me up with all the invasive tegu people in Florida. Because he worked with USGS invasive plants and the state park invasive plant people. And so we had gone to Puerto Rico and then Brazil together because we were in the same graduate program at University of Nebraska. And so we would classes were kind of online, but you would go and live in regional field studies. And I did Puerto Rico, Brazil, and then England. And so when we were there, he was in the bathroom. And he went to the bathroom, go in the shower, and it's like an open window, open bathroom, right? It's just the boys' side of the camp. And he started yelling and screaming. The day before, I had removed a centipede, not exaggerating, that long and that wide from a bathroom when the maid, I don't want to say maid, the woman who cared for the center had yelled for us. And I rescued that with a snake hook also. Beautiful.
So like a foot long?
It was easily longer than a foot and 2-3 inches wide. It was massive. Jeez. And it's super deadly. A bite from that would put you in the hospital. You'd be dead super quick within hours. That needs antivenom too. So that is
Really?
a very, very centipedes. You do not mess with centipedes ever, ever, ever. They are little psychos. But this fur
I've seen people free handling centipedes.
that's stupid. Yes. Even the little ones can have extreme high risk of allergen. They're very painful bites. Like most scorpions are pretty chill if they're the bigger ones. The little guys are more panicky. Like your bark scorpions can't really hold. So it's very like when it comes to exotics, it's really by the species than the individual based on their behavior, you know? And just like why 1 in 1,000 American alligators can do ed programs, you know? It's like there's most of them can't, but some do. But yeah, it's crazy. No, centipedes should not be freeheld. And then scorpions and tarantulas and all that at your own risk, mostly because they give you a little bit of a warning before they strike, and centipedes are not going to. And when it comes to, and there's also attack versus fear-based biting. And I think centipedes aren't scared of anything, it seems like. I just kidding. They panic too, but like they're just crazy little guys. So I just rescued that centipede. The next day I hear this call. They're screaming from the bathroom. And we go there, and this bathroom has a little chair for like kids to sit in, like a little chair. And it's got one of those like posts like this with a circle and the snake, a little teeny fer-de-lance, that big, wrapped around the chair. And he can't get out without walking too close within its strike range. And so once again, there's nobody within 4 to 6 hours who can help you. And so this video to this day still doesn't exist, which kills me because I would have loved to see this video. There's only pictures of it. But I basically just went in with a snake hook and did the most boring thing in the world, just scooping a little baby fer-de-lance, dropping in a bucket, while 15 people were like, oh, and then, cheers, you saved him. And I'm like, but I left, and when I left, I got to call my venomous friends in Florida, and I was like, hey, for the first time, I got to use my venomous training and I helped people. And they were like, oh, that's awesome. And I was like, and it was like the most unexciting event ever. But what's funny, the coral snake was actually pretty wicked. We found this neotropical coral snake, and it was a snake bucket we had set up the day before, had a duct tape lid. This thing had gotten stuck to the duct tape. And so we weren't sure what it was, but when they pulled it out, I'm like, that's going to be a coral snake. And they were like, no. Everybody's like worried about saving it. And they go to get their bare hands on it. I go, stop. And I'm like, look at it. And we're trying to pull up a book and they're trying to identify it. I go, forget the book. Look at the snake. Its face is open like this and stuck open. And there's yellow venom dripping on the duct tape.
Wow.
And I'm like, you don't need to look it up because there's thousands of species. Or hundreds. You're not going to figure it out. Like you open the book, it's like 20 pages of coral snakes and mimics. There's no way you're going to figure it out. And I think after 2 weeks, they didn't figure it out, honestly. They sent it to the venom research lab and we gave up. But I'm like, that is venom right there. And you're about to free handle this animal in the panic to save it. And so, yeah, we put on thick leather gloves because it's a coral snake with a tiny little head. And we just, greased him up with oil just like if he was stuck to a glue trap. And he went to the venom research lab, and he was fine. He was totally fine, but it just amazed me that people who had no experience saw those bright colors and were like, let's just save it. It's okay. And I'm like, oh, let's look it up. I'm like, you guys, come on. Like, hold on. Like, until you know it's safe, treat it as dangerous, not the other way around. So I don't know. It's funny how these situations come up, but each one of them, I think, is, again, it's about learning, growing, moving forward, not repeating it. And I do look back and go, I shouldn't have been so careless. But like all 3 of my tegu bites were very different circumstances. Like the very first one was I was holding an animal. My husband was getting the supply ready to the right. And then I looked to ask him a question and just slightly loosened my grip. I didn't notice I did it, but when I turned to say something, I did. And the tegu just went bam and just turned its head up and grabbed me. And that was the first one. So like, and I had it pinned really well, I thought, waiting for him. So, every situation is a little different, but I would say that, you can only hope that people learn from their mistakes. And this heartbreaking thing about the free handling, which I do believe is becoming a trend, I do believe it's increasing. And is like, was it always there? Or until it was filmed to just become more popular and more observable, So I think the fact that it's so easy for anybody to be a celebrity, anybody to go, look at me, it's becoming this platform. So I think it is increasing because now people are emulating, and every one of these free handlers who's getting bit is doing it again. The Taipan holder was back free handling a cobra less than a week out of the hospital, and it was someone that who fixed his car who lets him hold his cobra because they're not letting him have snakes or whatever, and he's free handling it. And then that kid right now who just got the 88 vials, getting bit by the Eastern Diamondback, had a copperhead bite before that, and 88 vials. Like, you're probably having a reaction because you're having multiple bites. That's an average of 20 to 30 vials is normally used. That's one of the things we're discussing online right now is like, why would he need 88 vials? And I mean, I think it has to do with prior exposure and allergens and his body rejecting it. Then you have, like I said, dingo dying of the elapid bite after he'd already had an elapid bite and a venom allergy. So it's like, why are people either free handling after they're bit, free handling, or someone like Dingo? He was safer and he was using equipment, but he often used gloves, and we know they're not bite proof, and you have an elapid allergy, and it's not my place to say you're a father, you should have done better. Like, and I know a lot of people online were saying that. Every human has to make their own choices in life, but it's heartbreaking to see what happens and have to sit back and go, we wish you were still alive. We wish you made better choices. And for a lot of ways, I mean, I love Steve Irwin, but he should have done the same. His was a freak accident, but he put himself at risk like that thousands of times.
Yeah.
Like to believe if he was alive today, similar to Dingo, his practices would change over time because his ethics and heart were truly good. I can't say the same about Taipan bite or Eastern Diamondback bite guys, because you see videos of them literally harassing animals, like you said with the guy whacking the retic. So it's...
and then there's the other side of the spectrum where I've seen these kids on like Instagram after I was exposed to this through the Taipan guy.
Yeah.
And then the algorithm started feeding it to me, and I had to say I'm not interested to make it stop. But there was like this emo kid out in the desert, just like, oh, I just found this rattlesnake, and he's holding it and letting it go through his hands, and he's like, look, I'm in touch with nature, and so there's that too, where it's the person that thinks that they can instantaneously domesticate wildlife, right?
They don't know their history, because we all know, and I forget the names of both these people, but the famous woman who was the witchy woman who, like,
I saw that,
held all the rattlesnakes in their hands and said that they needed to trust her. She died by a rattlesnake bite. What about the famous herpetologist who was in his 70s or 80s, who held the gaboon viper by the tail, and he died? He got bit while saying the phrase, "This is the only snake that can't climb up on its own body." And then it did that, bit him, and he died. So like, it's like, if you like, once again, it's a lack of science, and it's also a huge lack of history, because history tells us what has happened, and that is, no, you can't let yourself get bit to build up a tolerance unless you're one random dude in history. No, They don't just love and respect you. Eventually they're going to bite you. I mean, it's just, I don't know, even a dog that you raised from a puppy, that you love and take care of, when he starts going senile, he or she, and they start getting the cataracts and the brain goes, that dog can become aggressive. I see it happen in senior dogs all the time. One of the things I've done was I've a veterinary advisor. I'm not a DVM, but I would say I can help you know if he needs to see a vet or not. I work with a lot of DVMs. And I helped launch the veterinary program at Grand Canyon University, where I was a professor for 7 years. And it eventually turned to the veterinary degree program that they now have there, the pre-veterinary degree program. So it's like your undergrad degree to get into vet school. And so I've been a very big part of that community as well, from my background with husbandry and exotics, and then partnering with DVMs who do just dogs and cats. And we do a great overlay of experience to partner and help. And it works out great. And to me, it's just very heartbreaking, when you go into this veterinary aspect and you just see such a lack of knowledge. It's missing in the science. It's missing in the veterinary field. It's missing in the zoo field. There's just a big bias towards reptiles. And so the gaps and the lack of laws are being filled in by all these people just looking for attention. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're not respecting wild animals for how dangerous they are and what they're capable of. Just like people don't respect breeds of dogs for the same reason. And then they ban breeds and blame the breeds when it's the person. You need to know what they're physically capable of. You know what their mental state's at. You need to know the animal's behavior to communicate. You need to keep your eye on it so you don't make mistakes like me and get bit when I tag you. You got to watch the animal, know the animal, but you always have to understand that there is a risk there, just like driving a car or anything else, flying a plane. There's tons of risks in everyday life, just like our medical choices with vaccines and medicines. Like, it's all about weighing risk versus benefit. Ask your pharmacist, ask a medical doctor, ask your herpetologist, ask your zookeeper, ask the people to get the right information and get multiple pieces of information and see how they line up. And getting people to think like a scientist, doesn't matter what your background is. If you can think like a scientist and use history and science to make decisions, is the best tools you got, you know? And unfortunately, it's the land of look at me, and there's not enough laws to prevent these people from, honestly, the animal neglect and abuse that they are causing. And it's disgusting they get looped in with us. And it's I think that's one of the reasons I'm such an advocate about it. Like, I might not own and handle venomous I own one venomous snake. I don't handle them every day. But I feel very involved in the sector in that I go to the symposiums. I work for an amazing venom researcher in a venom lab at Hayes Lab at LLU. And I'm very encased in this, this idea that the animals deserve more respect and understanding, because at the end of the day, rattlesnakes especially are shy, sensitive creatures that just want to be left alone. The last thing they want to do is be handled. And you're right. The fact that these people advocate that they're closer to nature, they're just nut jobs. There's someone claiming that the alien clones are coming down this weekend on Mount Sinai. Like that. That's what they're doing. They're just the reptiles.
They are though, Rachel.
Yeah.
So what do you? So you go in your snake room right now. I know you got to get ready for your camping trip, right? So you're in a hurry and you see this giant stool, and you have to clean it real quick, and you're in a hurry, and you go in there and you accidentally get bit. What do you do?
Good question. So the protocol at my house is very similar to the protocol at my research lab, which is that, the first thing is a phone call. So if I were bit, the very first thing I would do is call Dr. Bill Hayes. And thankfully, as a good friend, colleague, and my PI, he's one of the most reliable people in the world. And he knows a phone call is an emergency, and he will answer or call me back and or it's an all text, I just got bit. And I'll get a phone call very quickly. That phone call is supposed to take place while I have antivenom in hand and I'm on the way to the hospital. So those are the steps. Grab antivenom, grab phone call, have somebody drive you to the hospital, because you can black out or have an allergy. You must be driven to the hospital. Somebody else drives you to the hospital, and I will be on the phone with him on the way, and then he will talk to me, and then the phone will be passed to the ER doctor or attendant when I arrive. The hospital has to administer the antivenom. A lot of people don't realize that. You buy it and keep it yourself, but the hospital administers it. You bring it to the hospital. And so it's also important to know the species that bit you. If it's in the wild, like if you're hiking or something, you take a picture. Don't try to kill it or catch it. Just a picture is great, because they have to have the right type of antivenom. But luckily at my house, all I have is a Sidewinder. And so I have Sidewinder antivenom, and my research lab, we have a Sidewinder there. So we also have Sidewinder antivenom there. And so if for some reason I was not able to get enough antivenom from a local hospital, Bill would make sure that the hospital is able to, and in most cases they're helicoptering it, depending on how quickly it's needed. There's also local zoos here, like the Phoenix Zoo, that would probably provide it. And the problem is, if I get bit at my university, I am very, very, very sure that it's like 100% covered. We're a medical university. I'd be treated in-house, their hospital, all that. It's a part of my occupational hazard. Getting bit by my own animal, you got two issues. You've got homeowners insurance issues, and you have the fact that it's not going to be covered. It's going to be $30,000 to $150,000, even up to, I've heard as much as $220,000 to $250,000.
What?
Yeah, so you own your antivenom, but they have to administer it. It's the hospital stay, it's the hydration, it's the fluids, and it depends on how much antivenom you actually need. Like the taipan bite and the eastern diamondback bite we've been talking about, both of them needed huge amounts of antivenom. The eastern diamondback bite, we're not sure yet. We think it's an allergy risk, or because he was bit before. But the taipan bite, he waited like 4 to 6 hours, I forget what the time frame was, to go to the hospital, because he was on Facebook asking for antivenom and begging, and he wasn't actually going to the hospital because he didn't have antivenom. He had to go online and beg for it, and he waited to go to the hospital. And so he needed a way more than he should have, and he had a lot more organ damage than he should have.
So let me ask you this. This is news to me. So if you own the animal, it's not covered by insurance. So
if you're doing it as a job or occupation, like you're covered under the insurance. Like the only insurance I have is my homeowner's insurance. And that's not going to cover a bite. In fact, it's going to be a problem because most homeowners insurance doesn't know you have exotics. And if they did, they wouldn't want you to keep a ball python. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And so that's an issue where you can actually lose your house over it.
Sure.
Not to mention, yes, it's not covered. If you are bit by accident outside in nature, depending on your insurance and the situation, it's mostly covered. If you work for a zoo or academic institution, it's occupational hazard. It's covered because you're a worker. But if you own an animal or are purposely doing videos out manhandling snakes and stuff, if insurance can have any reason to deny you, they will. And health insurance will not cover you owning and working with your own venomous snake. I've never heard of it. Maybe some people have found different options if they like actually do it, like I said, as a job or as a work. But like I know the protocol when I lived in Florida, I worked with my friends and, that really, I will say times have changed. Antivenom was not readily available or affordable, at least when 15, 20 years ago, honestly, from what I know, or at least maybe we just didn't know, honestly, because the resources weren't there. We did not keep our own antivenom, but we had Venom ER and we had it on speed dial on our phones. And the joke was always that if you got bit, you went outside and threw the snake on your lawn and you'd be like, that bit me. Have to get your insurance to cover it. That was always the joke. We had the understanding that, yes, we knew it wasn't going to be covered, but we were going to live because Venom ER is the best response system in the entire world for antivenom. They literally land a helicopter in the parking lot, airlift you there. And you're already usually getting the antivenom, sometimes even in the transport. I've heard that's been possible.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a very different situation. But yeah, it's not worth it financially, physically, mentally. One of the things I can't post and share was someone who was bit about 2 to 3 years ago. And someone recently shared what they look like now because they're still going on Facebook and fighting and arguing and saying free handling's best. Someone recently sent me a picture of this person, which is why I can't share it. But let me just say this. This person's in their 40s and they look like a decrepit, disabled, can't even feed themselves with a spoon, 90-year-old man from the organ damage that it's done. But he's still hiding behind a computer going, like a little troll. And then someone goes, yeah, he's still doing that. But have you seen a picture of him? They go, out of respect for the family, I don't want you to share this. And they sent it to me. And I was like, this is what we should be sharing, though, the before and after. Like, this is what Venom does to you. It aged him 40 years, and he can't even feed himself or wipe his own butt. But he's still on a keyboard talking smack because he wants attention, because he's a lonely, sad, like you said, ugly, despiteful, hateful individual who is so hateful. They're just trolls. It's like a new age troll. So I don't know how we can go around it other than making people realize the truth. Like that Taipan bite guy has severe liver and kidney damage. He is not going to live to be an old man. He is not a healthy man before this, as you mentioned. And it blows my mind that they have to get. That's why I thought pedophile was a really good comparison at the beginning. It's like, what is with our country and these people falling in these loopholes where they can violate the same thing again and again and again and again and just not get a harsher, and
tax the system. Tax the system.
It does. Yeah.
So now, okay, so that's how you handle a bite in captivity. Now, what if, I see my kids running around and playing outside, out my office window here, and we have Eastern Diamondbacks everywhere. I've seen a 42-inch one that my neighbor killed, but I buried it. That one was brought to me. What if they get bit by one of those? What do I do? And I'll throw you a bone here.
Yeah.
I'm going to put a tourniquet on his arm.
Yeah, don't do that. Okay, so there are some things to that. The only time a tourniquet goes on is in specific situations with very, 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 very toxic venom. Cone snail, box jellyfish. Some things where there's not time to get antivenom, they actually have recommended tourniquet and chopping off of limbs.
Oh my God.
It's very, very rare, but it's like the most toxic venoms. One of the most toxic snakes in the world, arguably, is a Cape Cobra, and you still have about 4 to 6 hours to get antivenom. Even a Taipan, he took about 5-6 hours to get antivenom. So venomous snakes are really hilariously not nearly as toxic as some of these invertebrates. But tourniquet is never a good idea because arguably the venom is already moving through the body and you're just causing tissue damage. It's similar how in medieval times when people were sick, they would do what's called bloodletting. So they would cut you and they would have your arm and you would drain into a pan and thought they were letting bad blood out. In reality, you're taking someone who's sick and dehydrated and you're causing them to be anemic and have a low iron count and to be further dehydrated and you're killing them. That's a very bad thing, right? Yeah. So that's what the tourniquet would do. It would just cause more tissue damage. So they say, like, unless you're an expert who knows that what venom to use that with, and Bill Hayes and I've had this talk because he is one of those people. It's a very rare circumstance. The majority of the time, the best thing to do is to take a picture of what bit you and get to the hospital as quickly as possible. Now, it's also important to stay calm and not to run, as that will increase the blood pressure and the rate at which the venom moves through your body. And so, it's the idea, we use the phrase, especially when it's a necrotic venom, like rattlesnakes, we use the phrase time is tissue. So the quicker you get the antivenom in you, the quicker you save more tissue damage. But that's the problem in that, we're not able to, get it to you quick enough. And so, but you don't want to run. So it's like calmly and safely, quickly as possible, picture, get to a hospital, show them the picture, say what was bit. And for your native species, they are going to have the antivenom at your local hospital, or it'll be in collaboration with your local zoo. Kids are going to be a risk because the younger you are, very young and very old scales are going to be more of a quick downfall. And then there's also a difference between being bitten like the hand or the leg versus like the face or the neck or the chest or upper arm, like where it's closer to the heart, where it'll circulate quicker. Or you're going to have a reaction where this swells and causes breathing issues that are deadly. But the deadliest thing that's going to happen is an allergic reaction. And that's going to be the worst situation because the antivenom might not save you because you're going to be allergic to the antivenom and the venom.
So am I calling the hospital before we leave?
Yeah. I would probably do that. And that's usually what Bill does. Like I said, I call him and then he hangs up. Oh, I'm on the way to the hospital, and he calls and preps the hospital. So I think it's one of those things. Yeah, I think it's because it's a rare instance and they might need to connect people that calling the hospital on the way to the hospital would be a great idea. But you don't want to suck on it or use a device to suck on it. You don't want to pour alcohol on it or tourniquet it or electrocute it with a car battery. I've heard all these.
Just leave it alone. Just leave it
alone and quickly and safely get to the hospital, but try to keep your blood pressure. Keep the person calm. Talk to them. Tell them it's okay. If you can carry them versus them walking, but them walking is better than them running. And then they can calmly, I've always been told you can calmly walk to your car. If you're alone, you can try to drive somewhere. You just gotta be careful that you don't black out. But that's usually an allergic reaction response. But some people can get like really weird, like sudden drops in blood pressure based on certain venoms, because a lot of them attack the cardiovascular and circulatory system. And the most deadly ones are not the ones that eat tissue like a rattlesnake in a lot of ways. They're the neurotoxic venoms. So that's why like Mojave rattlesnakes get this like, ooh, they're so much dangerous because like the southern Mojaves and certain localities in Mojaves really have more of a neurotoxic range of venom. Animals and their venom are very locality specific. So the Mojaves in Arizona have this like reputation of being the worst, but it's because they shut down your heart and lungs. So similar to a lot of cobra venoms, they're neurotoxic. And so you're going to have pain, but you're not going to have the rotting and the swelling, and it's going to shut down your heart and lungs. So the death toll is much quicker. But again, you still usually with an adult have this 4 to 6 hour window. With a kid, it's going to be maybe cut in half. It depends,
So that's terrifying.
Body weight matters.
That's terrifying being a parent and thinking about my 40 or 50 pound child out there. So what's the argument for me to not go around and hack off the head of every rattlesnake and run them over?
Pick up the phone, put down the shovel. And I think the goal is that, snakes are very important. For their ecosystems, in particular, their food for a variety of other animals. They balance rodents and insects and other species. They actually eat a variety of things, not just rodents, insects and birds and stuff. And they balance the system, which gives opportunity for more biodiversity to flourish and compete. It gives the health to ecosystem while also removing and balancing diseases. They, of course, are very important for venom research, as well as one of the most important things people don't realize snakes do is they plant ecosystems, especially on the West Coast. The Western diamondback is one of the most successful planters of desert ecosystems, and it's because it eats rodents, and the plants, at least in the West Coast here, the desert adapted plants are actually evolved to go through 2 digestive systems, once through a rat and once through a snake, and then they get planted, and obviously it's a nice fertile poop, and that's what most plants do, but why twice? Because the snake moves 3 to 10 times more of a range away from the parent plant than a rodent will. And so snakes plant habitat. So arguably, they're incredibly important. They're both a predator and a prey animal. So they're middle of the trophic energy pyramid, meaning that there's things that they come down to eat and there's things that eat them. And they're actually somewhat in the lower scale. Many things eat snakes. So arguably, their importance is essential to ecosystem health. And they're shy, sensitive creatures who just want to be left alone. So practices like a lot of people, like I mentioned Brian Hughes earlier, he has a young kid that's under 10, a little girl. And, he moved to his natural area and bought this, beautiful acreage of native Sonoran desert here in Arizona. We had this talk and he said, am I going to be like everybody else or will I stick to my own philosophy? That's my kid on the line. And so, and then he tried that. He's like, can I move these snakes from the front porch area as I find these rattlesnakes to the back? Will they stay in one area? And the answer is they do. It doesn't usually take more than just once of moving them. And they're like, I don't want to be near the person. Okay, people never come here to this side of the property and they're always here. I'm not going to go there. And it's just that simple. So obviously it takes teaching your kids to watch where they step, being cautious. It adds a layer of safety. But there's a lot of things that are unsafe every day, like driving a car is a far greater risk to you and your family than almost anything you will ever do in your life. And we do that every day without even thinking about it, which is why so many accidents happen is people are so careless with the fact they're driving a giant wad of metal at incredible speeds. They don't seem to understand physics very well when people drive and have road rage, do they? Like, do you understand what one car length is? It's you in my car, us sitting next to each other at 60 miles an hour. Come on now. So I think that is part of it. And and I liked Brian's philosophy. So he did that. Yeah. And now he's expanded. I think he's something at like 13 to 20 acres now. And it's all this mountainous Sonoran desert. And he's got, the drones and the trail cameras. And he actually is able to tell where the snakes live and who spends their time. And he knows where every snake is and what they're doing, at least especially in the vicinity of his house. And I think that's so amazing, but even it shows to show that someone with all that experience, all that education, this rattlesnake relocation company, Rattlesnake Solutions, and, still you have to stop and be a human and go, I have a kid, shoot. Will I stick with my philosophy or will I diverge? And I think that's so interesting to have that discussion because when it's emotional and it's in your face and it's your kid facing a rattlesnake trapped against a wall, like as what would be in your head, like how will you think versus when you're on a podcast talking about the situation? It's very different.
Sure.
Like, will we suddenly rush, like the people in Brazil I mentioned, to rush to touch the coral snake with our bare hands because we're so worried about it? We don't stop to go, stop. It's just duct tape. It's not a life or death situation. Like, it's hard to stop and think logically because humans are still prey animals. We still think in that flight or flight spectrum. And I think it's tough to break that, but we have to always stop and go, stop, breathe, look. And people I know have talked about rattlesnakes being like the new stop, drop, and roll for fire because, everybody was on fire so much in the 90s. Such an important lesson we learned. Stop.
I was there.
I was there. You were there. We're not that much different in age. And I think it's similar to that. But what I've been taught with rattlesnakes is stop, breathe, take a step back, look around. And you can break that into 3 or 4 steps, whatever. But I usually say stop, breathe, step back, look around. And the idea is that you're stopping, you're breathing, like take a deep breath. That's one of the most important things, people holding their breath when they're scared. So you breathe, you're stopped. Now you're taking a step back away from the danger, but we're also looking around to make sure we're not stepping onto another rattlesnake. So, you could even say, stop, look, back up or whatever. But the idea is you back up slowly, you move around it, you're aware of your area, where is it going? And I truly believe if you're working in high grass, that you should be wearing boots and gaiters. A lot of people are like, oh, gaiters, blah, blah, blah. I mean, when you're out and you're finding, like I've gone with Brian on some field work, and we found just under 60 snakes, 95% of which were black-tailed rattlesnakes, and a few western diamondbacks, and then there's a few like coach whips and gopher snakes, but well over 50 rattlesnakes in a 24-hour period. And it was all in like very parsley grass. The grass is like knee high and it's in clumps and you can't see them at all. And I thank God they all had enough gaiters. And I know after that trip, I went and bought me and my students a set of gaiters. And, and obviously they don't protect all the way around your leg and all that, but like they're really good for the idea you're moving forward. And if you were to step, it can get you in that worst case scenario. But like my good friend Kil Morris, have you seen his work? You got to have him on the podcast. He's got the fake leg and he steps on the rattlesnakes. You've probably seen
yes. Yeah, I've heard about that.
Amazing human being. He's actually, we've been able to partner because I was a science summer camp teacher and volunteer for the Phoenix Herpetological Sanctuary, where he's been the venom manager currently and in the past, on and off for years. Yeah, venom manager, PHS. Really amazing guy. Love his research. Super, when I talk about people who don't tail, that's him. He doesn't tail. He's super safe, probably the safest venomous worker I've ever seen. Very ethical, very into conservation. Can't say enough about him. And his work is great because when his work with his fake leg, no, the heat doesn't matter. Everybody asks that. No, like the leg is a great replica in the desert. Everything's hot. You're arousing to the point that they're restrained but not harmed. And the vast majority of the time, they're just kind of doing this and hiding. And then a small amount of time, they're doing a panic wiggle noodle. And then less than 3% of the time, they show any aggression or biting.
Yeah, you got to get him on my podcast, please, because I've brought that up like I think 3 times now or 4 times.
All right,
now,
I will personally text him when we get off and tell him, please go on this. And I know it's just because he's really busy. He's also a father. He's a Mormon pastor of a church. He's got so many things going on, but he's like
and he's out there stepping on snakes with fake boots.
Yep, and he'll tell you it scares his wife every day. But what's amazing with that is and then so one of the criticism is the heat, which we don't think is a problem. The other one is, well, what happens if you step on a snake to the point it breaks ribs? And that's why you need gaiters. Nobody wants to do that. Things happen. And, in that 3% of the time, or probably more if you pressed harder, which he's not going to do in his study because it's unethical, obviously. We don't want to hurt snakes for fun or for science. But the idea is that I'm sure we all agree that would increase if the snake was actually injured. So it's better to wear the gaiters. It's just better to be safe. But yeah, no, he's an incredible guy. So I will definitely put in a word because cool. He's a good friend.
That's awesome. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
We just have like a whole Arizona people podcast with all the people I mentioned.
Yeah.
Like
do a roundtable discussion.
Yeah, panel discussion, West Coast versus East Coast now.
All right, Rachel, I'm not going to keep you anymore. I know you got to go camping. We've done 3 hours and 10 minutes officially. We talked for 20 minutes.
That's like a full professor lecture. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
2
lot.
days
I know that.
I love it though. Good.
I know, I know a lot of the stuff. A lot of the stuff you said is going to connect with the people that listen to the podcast, and some of it might make some people uncomfortable, and that's okay because we're keeping animals in our houses, and that's there has to be uncomfortable conversations.
I agree.
On whether or not what we're doing is ethical, and what can we improve.
Yeah.
I think that. It was great to have you on and get a different perspective, and I appreciate all your knowledge and your ADHD is a gift, and
thank you.
and keep wielding.
You're not an idiot. You're not an idiot at all. I really appreciate the invite, and this was really, really fun. I think you're so right. It may upset people, but if they get upset, they need to also take a deep breath, take a step back, and go, what about this is actually upsetting me? Because you know what? The invasive cat people get very mad at me too. And I look at them and I go, but aren't I advocating for the best for the cat? Aren't I advocating for you to be a better pet owner? Are you mad because I want you to be better and you don't want to take the time to do so? We got to ask yourself why we respond with those emotions. And at the end of the day, I'm not trying to take people's pets away, but I would advocate that our pets deserve better. Our animals deserve better. And these beautiful species of reptiles deserve better. And if you're a hobbyist who loves them, you should want to give them the best captive care. And you should want to protect and preserve them in their wild homes. And
absolutely,
we should all be on the same page with that, just like clean water and clean air. It should be something we can all come to agreements on. But I thank you for this opportunity for intellectual discourse, because this is how we stand up against these documentaries and these YouTube stars who are going to only show the negative side of what we're able to do. And we do great things. And if it wasn't for hobbyists and zoos and people like us, reptiles would really be lost, because there would be nobody out there to help them and breed them and save them and to voice for them.
Absolutely. Rachel, you'll be back on. We still have to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff.
6 hours next time.
I appreciate it.
Beat our record.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam. Appreciate you.